Welcome to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure, what if Harry and Hermione shared a single soul split across two bodies? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1, The Second Heartbeat. The kitchen at Grimmauld Place kept two clocks and neither of them agreed. Harry had learned to live between their quarrels. The tall one by the pantry ran 4 minutes fast and chimed like a cracked bell. The little brass one on the mantel dawdled, wheezing out the hours as though each cost it something. He was sitting at the scrub table at 2:30 in the morning, or 10 to 3, depending on which clock you trusted, and he was counting, not the minutes. He had given up on the minutes. He was counting the small sounds the old house made when it thought no one was awake, the tick of cooling pipes, the shuffle of the portrait in the hall settling deeper into its sleep, the wind finding the gap under the back door and testing it, once, twice, the way a burglar tests a lock. He counted these things because counting kept him at the table instead of upstairs in the room he shared with Ron, where the ceiling had begun, lately, to feel like a lid. He had not slept properly in 11 days. He knew the number because Hermione had told him. She kept track of things he lost track of. The tea in front of him had gone cold an hour ago. He drank it anyway because pouring another cup meant standing, and standing meant the stairs might creak, and the creak might wake her, and this was the part he did not examine too closely. He did not want to wake her, and he wanted very badly for her to already be awake, and both of these things were true, and he did not know what to do with either of them. The floor above him gave a single soft groan. Harry went still. It was not the wind. The wind had a language he had come to know, all long vowels and sighs, and this was a different word entirely, a short, deliberate consonant. A footstep, a person shifting their weight from the edge of a bed to the cold boards, deciding something. He knew, before he heard the door, that it would be her. He could not have said how he knew. Ron slept like the dead and snored like a felled tree. Ginny had gone to the burrow. Mrs. Parriott. Weasley's room was on the far side of the house where the floor did not carry, but it was more than elimination, more than deduction. Something in Harry's chest had turned toward the sound the way a plant turns, slowly and without being asked, toward a window. The stairs took her weight one riser at a time. She was trying to be quiet. She was not very good at it. Hermione moved through the world with the confidence of someone who had read about stealth rather than practiced it, and he found himself smiling at the fourth step, the one that always betrayed you, as it betrayed her now, with a yelp of old nails. She appeared in the doorway wrapped in a jumper 3 sizes too large, one of Ron's, the sleeves swallowing her hands. Her hair was doing what it did at night, which was whatever it wanted. She saw him at the table and stopped, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and the tall clock chimed its cracked half-hour into the silence. "You're awake," she said. "So are you." "I couldn't." She stopped. Started again. "I had a feeling you were down here." He turned the cold mug a quarter turn on the table. "A feeling, don't say it like that." She came the rest of the way in and pulled out the chair across from him, and the chair scraped, and somewhere upstairs the house muttered. She folded herself into it with her knees drawn up, heels on the edge of the seat, the enormous jumper pooling around her like a tent. "I woke up and I was thirsty. That's all. And I thought, he's down there, and I didn't even wonder how I knew it, I just came down. Maybe you heard me. You weren't making any noise. Maybe you're a very good guesser." She looked at him then, properly, with the attention she gave a passage in a book that had said something it hadn't meant to say. "Harry, how long have you been sitting here thinking about the fact that I was about to come downstairs?" The question landed somewhere under his sternum and stayed there. He could have lied. It would have been easy. He was good at it. Had been good at it since he was small enough to hide under a table while his aunt told the neighbors he'd gone to stay with a criminal uncle. But he was tired, and it was 3 in the morning by the honest clock, and Hermione was sitting across from him with her chin on her knees looking at him as though the answer mattered more than sleep. "About 20 minutes, he said. She didn't gloat. That was the thing about her that he kept relearning. She never gloated when it counted. She only nodded, slowly, and wrapped the sleeves tighter over her hands, and looked at the middle of the table where neither of them was. "I've been trying not to tell you," she said. "Tell me what?" "That it's happening to me too." The pipes ticked. The little brass clock wheezed toward 3 and gave up 2 minutes short. Harry had not told anyone. Not Ron, not Hermione, not the version of himself he kept for the mirror. For weeks now, there had been a second thing living in his chest, quiet, patient, and it did not belong to him. It was easiest to describe by what it wasn't. It wasn't the scar. The scar was a hot wire, a foreign hand rummaging in his head, and he had grown grimly familiar with the shape of that intrusion. This was the opposite of intrusion. This felt like coming home to a house and finding a light already on and someone humming in the kitchen, and knowing from the doorway, without seeing them, exactly who it was. He had felt it strongest 3 times. Once, on the pavement outside the ministry, when Hermione had turned a corner ahead of him and out of sight, and a low, warm tone had gone through him like a struck string, and he had known she was frightened before he rounded the corner and found her facing down a snatcher, with her wand up and her voice perfectly steady. Once in the library upstairs, past midnight, when he'd woken with the taste of ink in his mouth, and the ghost of small, dense print swimming behind his eyes, and had gone up to find her asleep over a book with her cheek printed by the spine. And once, he had not let himself think about this one, the previous Tuesday, when she had cut her thumb on a tin of beans and he had felt it. A bright, clean sting in his own left hand, and had looked down at his unbroken skin and then up at her sucking her thumb and swearing, and something in the room had rearranged itself and never rearranged back. "Tell me yours first," she said. "I don't want to put words in it. If I say mine, you'll just agree with me because it fits, and then we'll never know if it's real or if we talked ourselves into it." That was so precisely her that he laughed, a small rough sound, and rubbed his face with both hands. All right. He set his hands flat on the table. "You cut your thumb on Tuesday." Her eyes came up. "On the beans. And I was standing by the sink and I felt it. Here." He turned his left hand over, palm up, and touched the pad of the thumb. Not like remembering it hurt, like it was happening to me. I looked down because I was sure I'd cut myself. There was nothing there. She was very still. In the bad light, her eyes were enormous. "And this morning," he went on, because now that he had started, he found he couldn't stop. "You were reading before breakfast, that gray book with the water stain. And I was up on the landing and I got a headache, right behind the eyes, and it wasn't mine. It was the shape of small print. It was the shape of your reading. And I knew if I came down, you'd have your fist against your temple. And you did. You had your fist against your temple. Hermione, I keep knowing where you are. Not guessing, knowing. Like, he searched for it. Like when you're in a dark room and you can't see the wall, but you know it's there because the air changes when you get close to it. You've been the wall. For weeks. Everywhere I go, I can feel where you are in the house, and I've been telling myself I'm just used to you. I've been telling myself we've been through so much that of course but that's not it. Is it? That's not it." "No," she said. Her voice had gone very small and very certain, which was a combination he had only heard from her a handful of times, all of them the moments before everything changed. "That's not it!" Upstairs far off, Ron turned over and the bed frame complained. They both waited until the house was quiet again. It was an old habit by now, the two of them waiting out an interruption, and they did it without discussion. And the doing of it, the shared instinct to hold a fragile thing steady until the danger passed, struck Harry suddenly as its own kind of evidence. "Now yours," he said. Hermione unfolded slightly. She put her feet on the floor. She was building towards something, he could tell. She had the look she got before an examination, gathering herself, ordering the world into a line she could walk down. "I dream your dreams," she said. The tall clock ticked. "Not all of them. The bad ones. I dream the graveyard, Harry. I dream the cupboard. I dream a room the size of a cupboard, and I'm small and there's a light bulb, and someone is walking on the stairs above me. 1, 2, 3, and I count the steps because if I count them, I can be ready. And I've never told you this because it's not my memory. I have no right to it, but I've been living in the understairs cupboard of your childhood 3 nights a week since June. And I wake up and I can still smell her voice snagged, the spiders, dust and spiders and floor polish. And I know your aunt keeps the floor polish on the second shelf, and I have never been to your house, and I know where your aunt keeps the floor polish." Harry had stopped breathing somewhere in the middle of this. He made himself start again. "Second shelf," he said. "Behind the shoe brushes." "Behind the shoe brushes," she said, and pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth. And for a moment they only looked at each other across the ruin of his cold tea. He had never told her about the cupboard. He had told her he'd grown up unhappy. He had told her once, drunk on the giddy safety of second year, that his relatives were the worst people in England. He had never told her about the count. 1, 2, 3. The ritual he'd built at 5 years old to survive the sound of Vernon Dursley coming down for breakfast. He had never told anyone. It lived in the oldest and most locked room of him, and she had been sleeping in it. "How long?" he said. "June. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you?" She wasn't accusing him. She was asking it of both of them at once. The way you'd ask why 2 people standing in the rain had each assumed the other had the umbrella. Because it's mad. Because there's a name for someone who tells her best friend she's been having his memories, and it isn't a nice name. Because I thought it might be a curse, or legilimency, or something Voldemort was doing to both of us to make us, I don't know, to make us leak into each other so he could. She stopped, shook her head hard, once, hair everywhere. "But it doesn't feel like him. That's the thing I keep coming back to. When he's in your head, it feels like a hook. This doesn't feel like a hook. This feels like a door that was always open," Harry said, "and we only just noticed the draft." She looked at him. Something passed over her face that he felt as much as saw. A warmth that started in his own chest a half second before it reached her eyes. And he understood, with the slow vertigo of a man realizing he has been standing on a stair that isn't there, that he had felt her feel it, her being moved and his chest had moved first. The feeling had arrived in him before it arrived in her, or at the same instant from the same place, as though there were one source and 2 windows. "Do that again," he said. "Do what?" "Feel something. On purpose, don't tell me what." She frowned, but she trusted him. She always trusted him. It was the great reckless generosity of her, and it undid him every time, and she closed her eyes and thought of something. Cold water came into Harry's mind. A river, brown and quick. A stony bank. A dog barking somewhere out of frame, and under it a great ache of missing. A specific missing. an absence shaped exactly like two people who did not know where their daughter was and were not allowed to. It arrived complete. It arrived with the smell of the river in it. Your parents, he said quietly. You were thinking about the walk by the river, the one near your grand's. You go there when you… He stopped. He did not have the word. When I can't stand it, she said, and opened her eyes, and they were wet. Harry, you saw the river. I smelled the river. You've never been to the river. I know. She put both hands flat on the table, mirroring him without seeming to notice she was doing it, and now their fingertips were an inch apart on the old scarred wood, and the inch of air between them was doing something. He could not have described it to a stranger. It was the feeling of a word on the tip of the tongue, but bodily. The almost of a sneeze. Two magnets turned the right way and brought slowly close, that last moment before the pull takes over and the decision is made for you. I want to try something, Hermione said. Of course she did. She was frightened half to death, he could feel it. A thin, high wire of fear running under everything, singing. And she wanted to run the experiment anyway because the not knowing was worse than any answer, and that was so entirely who she was that he loved her for it, in a way that had no edges, no beginning, no place where it became something he could hand back. All right, he said, give me your hand. He gave her his hand. The moment their palms met, the house went away. That was the only way he could hold it afterward. The house went away. Not dramatically. There was no light, no wind, no swell of unseen strings. It was subtler and far larger than that. It was the sensation of two rooms discovering they had always shared a wall and the wall was gone. The sudden doubling of a space you thought you knew the size of. He had spent his whole life inside the one room of himself, and he had furnished it and defended it and grown used to its dimensions. And now the wall he had leaned against since he was old enough to be afraid was simply not there, and on the other side of where it had been was Hermione. All of her, the whole ordered blazing sprawl of her, and she was looking back into his room with the same astonishment, and neither room was smaller for the other being it. They were larger. They were the same size, which was the size of both. He felt her feel his childhood the way you feel a cold coming on, an ache moving into the joints of him, every locked door and him standing open, and her walking through them not as a thief, but as someone coming home to a house she'd forgotten she owned. He felt her flinch at the cupboard and steady herself and stay. And he felt himself, at the same moment, standing in the wide, bright, difficult country of her mother's hands braiding her hair too tight before school, the exact humiliation of a joke she hadn't understood until 3 days later, the private cathedral, silence of the first library she'd ever been let loose in, the small, hard knot of being always the one who cared too much and was too much and knew too much and was left, for it a little bit, alone. He walked into that last room and he wanted to break something. Someone had left her alone. For years. For being exactly the thing he would have crossed the world to sit beside. You're not too much, he thought, or she thought. He genuinely could not tell. The thought simply occurred in the shared room and belonged to whoever needed it. You were never too much. There was just never enough of them. Somewhere very far away, in the small country of the body, Hermione was crying without any sound, tears running down and off her jaw and falling on the back of his hand, warm, and he felt them land and could not have said whose face they came from. And underneath all of it, under the shared memory, under the doubled room, under the warmth that had no floor, there was the thing. He noticed it the way you notice, on a still night, that a house you have called silent has been full of sound all along. The fridge, the pipes, your own blood. There was a tone. It had been there the whole time. It had been there, he understood, with a slow cosmic tilt his whole life. A single low sustained note, felt rather than heard, the way you feel the lowest pipe of a great organ in the floor in the teeth before you know it is sound. And it was one note. Not two notes in harmony. Not his note and her note twined together. One string. Drawn taut, sounding, and he was one end of it, and she was the other, and the note was what ran between, and the note was them, was the single thing they were before they were two people, and had been sounding, unheard, since before either of them had a name. He surfaced with a gasp. His hand was still in hers. The kitchen reassembled itself around them, unfairly ordinary, the cold tea, the wheezing clock, the jumper sleeves, the water stain on the table where 100 years of someone else's cups had stood. Hermione's face was wet and stunned and about a foot from his own. Neither of them let go. That was one soul, she said. She said it in the tone she kept for things she had proven. Harry, that wasn't two people feeling each other. That was one, that was. And her formidable vocabulary, the vocabulary that had walked her through every locked door in the wizarding world, simply stopped at the threshold of this, and she said helplessly, there's only one of it. I know, he said. How can there be only one of it? I don't know. There are two of us. I know. She was laughing now, or crying, or the thing that lives between the two when a person is too full to choose, and she pulled her hand back at last and pressed both palms to her own face as though to check it was still hers, and Harry looked at his own hand lying on the table where hers had been and thought, absurdly, that it looked lonely. We have to tell someone, she said into her hands. We're not telling anyone. Harry? Who? He kept his voice low. Upstairs, the house slept on. Who do we tell, Hermione? Dumbledore's dead. We tell the order and they file a report and someone writes it down and someone reads it and it goes up a chain, and somewhere at the top of that chain is a man who spent his whole life learning to break souls into pieces. You want to send a memo to the war that there's a whole one walking around? She lowered her hands. He watched the argument organize itself behind her eyes. He could feel it, actually, the specific busy churn of Hermione building a case, and it was strange and wonderful and slightly terrifying to feel her disagree with him from the inside, to feel that even now, even sharing whatever unspeakable single thing they shared, she was still entirely herself, still capable of thinking he was wrong and preparing to prove it. "We don't understand it," she said. "That's the point. We could be hurting each other and not know it. What if it's dangerous? What if being apart is dangerous, or being together is, or, Harry, I felt your heart. I don't mean I felt fond of you. I mean I felt the muscle, I felt it beating, and for about 10 seconds I couldn't tell you if it was yours or mine, and that should terrify us. That should send us straight to the nearest person who's read more than we have, and instead you want to sit on it because you don't trust anyone, which I understand, I do, you've never had a single reason to, but that's not a plan, that's a wound making decisions. It should have stung. It didn't. That was the extraordinary part. She had reached into the oldest bruise he had and pressed it and named it, and because he could feel that she did it with no cruelty and enormous love, it landed as care rather than injury. He understood, dimly, that this was going to be the shape of the rest of his life, if they let it be, that no one would ever be able to hurt him as she could, because no one else would ever be standing inside the room, and that the same fact meant no one would ever be able to comfort him as she could either, and that these were the same fact, and there was no way to keep one without the other. "You're right," he said. She blinked. What? "You're right. It's a wound making decisions. I don't trust anyone. But," and here he leaned forward and she leaned in to meet him, and their heads were close over the table in the ruined lamplight. "Two conspirators, two halves. I trust you." That's the whole list, Hermione. That's the entire list of people. So here's what I'll do. We don't tell the order. We find out what this is ourselves first, so that whatever we say to anyone we say it knowing more than they do. This house is full of dark old books that the ministry would faint to see. Creature won't tell. You read faster than anyone alive. And I will not leave your side while we do it. Not because I'm afraid of the war. He stopped. Make himself say the true thing, which was harder than any lie, because I don't want to. Because for the first time I can remember, I know exactly where I am. I'm at your left hand. That's the address. And I'd rather be there than safe. The words came out of him more easily than words had ever come, and he understood why a half second later, she'd been feeding him the courage to say them, without knowing she was doing it, the way one lung will breathe harder to make up for the other. He'd felt the small brave push of it come across the table and arrive in his chest as steadiness. They were doing it already. They were already breathing for each other. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. The fear was still there. He could feel it. He thought he would always be able to feel it now, and that was its own kind of vow. But something had settled over it, the way snow settles and holds a shape. "At my left hand," she said. "All right. But we do it properly. Notes. Sources. We treat it like it's real because it is, and we don't let it turn into a religion where we just feel things and call them true. If we're one soul, I want to know how, and why, and what it costs, and whether it can be taken. And I want it written down in ink so that if something happens to my head, the ink remembers. Whether it can be taken," Harry repeated. She met his eyes. "Everything can be taken, Harry. That's the only law I've ever found that doesn't have an exception. I'd rather know the price before someone else names it for us." He should have felt cold. Instead, he felt the thing that had frightened him most. All his life, the certainty that everything he loved would be taken from him, turn over in his chest and reveal on its underside something he had never seen there before. Because if she was right, if everything could be taken, then this could too. But you could not take one thing and leave the other. You could not sever a note and keep the string. Whatever they were it together or not at all. And there was a terrible clean freedom in that, a lightness he had never had. He had spent his life braced to lose people one at a time. He was not going to lose Hermione one at a time. He was not going to lose her at all, or he was going to stop being. And either way, the arithmetic of dread he had run since he was 1 year old had just been handed a new and simpler sum. He didn't tell her any of that. Some of it she felt anyway. He watched her face change as across the table, and the rest he kept, for now, in a room she was welcome to any time she came looking. "Tomorrow," he said. "The library. First light, she agreed. She stood, and the enormous jumper resettled around her, and she paused with her hand on the back of the chair. "Harry, when we touched, did you feel?" She stopped, and he felt her decide to be brave, and it cost her something, and she spent it. "Was there a note?" "There was a note," he said. Her eyes closed. When they opened, they were bright. "I thought I imagined it. One note, not a chord. I kept waiting for it to be two things, and it never resolved," Harry said. "Because it was already whole." She stood there in the doorway, her hand on the frame, backlit by nothing, the whole dark house rising above her full of sleeping people and dangerous books and portraits dreaming their portrait dreams, and Harry sat at the table below her, and between them the note went on sounding, low and unbroken, the way it had sounded before either of them was born and would go on sounding. He suspected, long after the clocks had finished their argument for good. "Good night, Harry," she said. "Night." She went up. He counted her steps, 1, 2, 3, the fourth one crying out, and he found, this time, that the count did not frighten him. He was not listening for a monster. He was listening to the far end of himself climb the stairs to bed, and when her door closed he felt it as a small soft click somewhere behind his own ribs, a door that was his, that was hers, that was the one door they had, closing gently for the night. He did not sleep, but he stopped counting the sounds of the house because he no longer needed them to prove he wasn't alone. By first light, Hermione had already been in the library for an hour. Harry knew it before he opened the door. He came up the stairs in the gray wash of dawn with 2 mugs of tea he'd made in the dark, and he felt her the way you feel the sun on the back of your neck before you turn to it, a warmth with a direction. She was in the far corner, in the tall wing-backed chair that smelled of pipe smoke from some dead black who'd sat there hating the world, and she had 4 books open around her and a fan, and a 5th in her lap, and her wand was tucked behind her ear where she put it when she forgot she had it. "You didn't sleep either," he said, handing her the mug. "I slept for 2 hours and dreamed I was flying, which is your dream, so I don't think it counts as rest." She took the tea without looking up. "Sit down. I found 3 things and none of them agree, and I need you to hear all 3 so we can be confused together instead of separately." He sat on the arm of her chair, which put his shoulder near her head, and neither of them remarked on it, and the note under everything gave a low, pleased hum at the nearness that he was fairly sure they both felt and neither mentioned. "First," Hermione said, tapping the gray book with a water stain, "the Ministry version. The official taxonomy of soul magic, such as it is, which is thin, because the Department of Mysteries keeps the interesting parts, and the rest of us get moral instruction. According to this, there is 1 soul per body. Full stop. It's stated like arithmetic. 1 body, 1 soul, and the soul is entire and indivisible in the healthy wizard." She looked up at him. "Indivisible. In the visible. That word's doing an enormous amount of work, isn't it? Because we know it's not true. We know a soul can be divided. We spent a year hunting the pieces of one. So the Ministry either doesn't know or knows and lied, and either way this book is telling me what they want to be true, not what is. So the official story is we're impossible. The official story is we don't exist, yes. Which, frankly, is where I'd expect to find the truth about us, in the margin of a book that says we're impossible." She set it aside and drew the second one into her lap, a fat, crumbling thing bound in something Harry decided not to ask about. "Second, this is old, pre-statute, some of it pre-Merlin if you believe its own boasting, which I don't, but it's old. And it doesn't talk about souls as arithmetic. It talks about them as light. There's a whole section, look." She turned the book toward him, and the page was dense with a cramped brown hand and the diagram, faded, of a single flame with 2 wicks. It says that very rarely, once in an age, a soul is kindled in 2 lamps. That's the phrase. Kindled in 2 lamps. 1 flame, 2 wicks, and the flame is not halved by burning in 2 places because a flame isn't a quantity, it's an event. It's a thing that's happening, and a happening can happen in more than 1 place at once without being divided. She was speaking faster now, the words tumbling, and he could feel the specific joy of her, the pure, clean pleasure of a mind that has been handed a puzzle enormous enough to fill it. It says the 2 lamps burn toward one another all their lives. It says they can't be told apart by the soul that reads souls, that to a Dementor, to a Legilimens, to death itself, they read as 1 presence in 2 places. And it says, she slowed, it says they are stronger than any single flame and more easily put out. The room was very quiet. Down in the street, a milk float whined past and a bird began, uncertainly, to try out the morning. "More easily put out," Harry said. "Because you can pinch 1 wick," Hermione said, "and the flame doesn't die, it just draws back into the other lamp. But if you pinch them at the same time, or if you cut the whatever it is, the thing that lets the flame be in 2 places. The oil, the wick." She wasn't looking at the book anymore. She was looking at the middle distance, and Harry could feel her doing the thing she did, running the danger to its end so no one could surprise her with it. 1 flame in 2 lamps is harder to extinguish by accident and easier to extinguish on purpose, if someone knew how. If someone understood what they were looking at. "Nobody understands what they're looking at," Harry said. "You just said it yourself. The Ministry thinks we're impossible. The Ministry does." Hermione closed the old book gently, as though it might bruise. "But the Ministry isn't the only one reading about souls this year, is it? There's exactly 1 other person in Britain who has spent his life studying how a soul can be in more than 1 place at once." She looked at him, and he felt the cold a bit arrive in her before it reached her face. He did it by tearing. 7 times. He made himself a monster with a soul in pieces because he was so afraid of dying that he'd rather be broken and deathless than whole and mortal. And here we are, the exact opposite of him. Whole in 2 places and stronger for it, and mortal as anything. If he ever learns we exist, he won't. If he ever learns we exist, she went on because she had never once in her life let him comfort her out of finishing a true sentence. He will not be able to leave it alone, Harry, because we're the thing he decided was impossible. He cut himself to bits to cheat death, and we did the thing he wanted, a soul that survives in more than one vessel, and we did it by loving each other instead of murdering people, and I don't think there's anything in the world he would want more than to understand how and take it, and I don't think there is anything he would fear more than the fact that it was done at all. We're his proof that he chose wrong. Men like him don't survive being proven wrong, they'd rather burn the proof. Harry looked at her for a long moment. Then he took the third book, the one she hadn't got to yet, out from under her elbow, because he could feel her heart going too fast, and he wanted to give her hands something, and give himself something to look at, other than the fear he could feel her holding down. You said 3 things, he said. That's 2. What's the third? She was quiet. He looked up. She was watching him with an expression he had no name for. Something that started warm in his own chest and made him look down at himself to check. The third thing isn't in a book, she said. The third thing is that when I read they burn toward one another all their lives, I understood it. Not learned it. Understood it, the way you understand your own name. I've been doing it since I was 11, Harry. Burning toward you. I just thought it was. I thought it was ordinary. I thought everyone had one person they turned toward without deciding to. I thought that was just what a friend was. She stopped. The morning came in gray and honest through the tall, dirty window. I don't think it's ordinary. I think we've been 2 lamps our whole lives burning toward each other across a dark house, and last night we finally got close enough to see we were one flame. Harry did not trust himself to speak. He put the third book down, unread. Test me, he said instead. Because feeling was easier to do than to talk about. You did it last night in the kitchen. Close your eyes and think of something and I'll tell you what. That's not a test, that's a party trick. But she was already reaching into her cardigan pocket, and she pulled out something small and closed her fist around it and shut her eyes. All right, what am I holding? He didn't guess. That was the thing he was learning. Guessing was the wrong verb entirely. He simply turned his attention toward the warm place in his chest that was her. The way you turn your face toward a sound, and there it was, arriving not as a picture but as a texture. Cool and smooth and curved, with a small milled edge that his own thumb suddenly wanted to run around, though his own hand was empty. A coin, he said. A muggle one, silver. You've been carrying it a while, it's warm from your pocket, and you rub your thumb on the edge when you're thinking. You're doing it now. Her eyes came open. She uncurled her fist. A 50-pence piece sat in her palm, 7-sided, its milled edge catching the gray light, and her thumb was resting on it exactly where he'd felt it. It was my dad's, she said quietly. He gave it to me before I did the thing to their memories. I keep it because it's the only object in the world that still knows they exist, and you felt the edge of it. You felt me holding the last thing my parents ever handed me, and I never told you it was in my pocket, and I never told you I do that with my thumb. She closed her hand around the coin again. I've never told anyone that. There was no one to tell. It's the sort of thing you only say to a person who's already inside the room with you. I'm inside the room, Harry said. You're inside the room, she agreed, and the words meant something different now than they had an hour ago. Meant everything. Meant that the great locked solitude each of them had carried since childhood had a door in it after all, and the door led to the other, and neither of them would ever again be entirely alone in the dark of themselves. He reached over and took her hand off the arm of the chair, the one still closed around her father's coin, and held it, and the note swelled up warm and low between them. One string, unbroken, and they sat in the smell of dead men's pipe smoke, while the light came up over a city that did not know it had. Sleeping in one of its oldest houses, a single soul, waking to itself in 2 bodies for the first time. First light, he said. We start now. We already started, Hermione said, and turned her hand over so their palms met, wick to wick, years ago. We're just finally paying attention. Below them, the tall clock chimed 6 4 minutes fast, cracked and certain. The little brass clock, wheezing, would get there when it got there. And between the 2 of them, keeping neither clock's time, keeping an older and steadier measure, the second heartbeat went on. One muscle, felt in 2 chests, beating them both toward the day. The trouble with the secret, Harry discovered by 9 o'clock, was that it did not stay in the library where you left it. The house woke around them the way it always did, in stages from the top down. First Mrs. Modes, Weasley, whose footsteps had a purpose that carried through 3 floors, then the smell of frying, which climbed the stairs like a friendly ghost. Then Ron, last of all, who arrived in the kitchen with his hair at right angles to his head and sat down heavily and said, "Why do you both look like you've been up all night?" in the tone of a man who did not actually want an answer and would be annoyed to receive one. "We haven't," said Hermione, at the precise moment Harry said, "Couldn't sleep." And the 2 answers collided in the middle of the table and lay there. Ron looked between them. Harry felt Hermione's alarm go off like a struck bell, high and thin, and it was so loud in his own chest that he was briefly certain Ron must be able to hear it too, that it was ringing out into the kitchen for everyone to catch. It was not, of course. It was ringing in the one place only Harry could hear. But knowing that did not make it quieter, and he understood, sitting there with a rasher of bacon going cold on his plate, that this was going to be the hardest part. Not the danger, not the dark books, but the ordinary breakfast. The friend across the table, the thing they now were burning like a lamp behind their faces, while the person who loved them both reached across for the toast. "Right," said Ron, losing interest, and reached across for the toast. Harry made himself eat. He was aware of Hermione beside him, the way you are aware of a held breath. She had gone very still and very industrious, buttering a slice with the concentration of a surgeon. And under the stillness, the fear was still singing. And under the fear, this was the part that undid him a little, was a thread of something else. A warmth pointed straight at Ron, an old uncomplicated fondness for the ridiculously flattened boy shoveling eggs across the table, grief-tinged, because she had already understood something Harry was still catching up to. That whatever they had found in the night had a wall around it now, and Ron was on the other side of the wall, and there were when merits sold for that they widen? He is not going to understand. Hermione did not say, and Harry heard it anyway. And I can't explain it to him, because the first thing he'd do is worry, and the second thing he'd do is tell someone who could help, and the third thing is a funeral. That's not fair to him. Harry did not say back and felt her flinch because it wasn't fair, and she knew it wasn't fair, and being one soul apparently did not spare you the discomfort of your other half thinking you were being unkind. This was the thing the old book had not prepared him for. He had imagined, in the gray library dawn, that sharing a soul would be a kind of endless agreement, two instruments always in tune. It was not. He could feel Hermione decide something he thought was wrong, feel the whole architecture of her reasoning, agree with every beam of it, and still stand at the end of it and think, no, she was not him. She would never be him. The note that ran between them was one note, but a note is not an opinion, and Hermione Granger had never in her life surrendered an opinion to anyone, and he loved that about her far too much to want the bond to sand it away. "You've gone quiet," Ron said to Harry through eggs. "That's usually you working up to something stupid and brave." "Just tired," Harry said, "because if you're planning something, mate, tell me. Don't do the thing where you decide to save everyone and forget to mention it." Ron said it lightly, but it wasn't light. Harry could see it wasn't, and, this was new, he could feel Hermione see it too, feel her chest tighten with the same recognition, so that Ron's small buried hurt arrived in both of them at once and was witnessed twice, and neither of them could say a word about it. "You always forget to mention it." "I'm not planning anything," Harry said, and it was the truest lie he'd ever told, because he was not planning anything, he was only becoming something, and there was no memo for that. Ron studied him a moment longer, then shrugged, mollified or pretending to be, and went back to his plate, and under the table, unseen, Hermione's hand found Harry's and pressed once, hard. Not romance, not comfort exactly, but a signal. The oldest signal they had, the one that meant hold, the one they'd used in 100 tight corners to say don't move, don't speak, wait for it. And through the press of her fingers the fear came across clean and bright, and he took it from her. Or she took his steadiness, or the two things met somewhere in the middle and cancelled to something they could both carry, and the breakfast went on, and Mrs. Weasley asked if anyone wanted more, and the great secret sat between the three of them at the table, warm and unbearable, burning in two of the three, and no one dropped a fork. Later, on the stairs, when Ron had gone to help de-gnome the tiny grim yard and it was only the two of them, Hermione stopped him with a hand on his arm. "I hated that," she said quietly, "every second of it, lying to him." "I know. I felt you hate it. That's my whole point, Harry." She looked up at him, fierce and frightened and entirely herself. "I don't want to become the sort of person who's good at this. Who can sit across from Ron Weasley and lie to his face because it's safer? That's a step down a road, and I've read enough to know where that road goes, and the people at the end of it all thought they were only keeping one small secret to protect someone." She let go of his arm. "So promise me, whatever we are, we don't let it make us smaller. We don't let it make us the kind of people who keep everyone on the other side of glass. We stay decent. We stay people who tell Ron eventually. Even if it's dangerous, even if I'm the one who said we shouldn't." And that, Harry thought, was the difference between them in a single speech, that even now, even having felt what they'd felt, she was already worried about who it would make them, already standing guard over their own decency, already refusing to let a miracle turn her cruel. He would have kept the secret forever without a second thought if it kept her safe. She could not keep it a single morning without interrogating the cost to their souls, the ordinary souls, the moral ones, the part of a person that has nothing to do with lamps and flames. "I promise," he said, and meant it, and felt, in the place where she lived now, that she believed him, which was its own kind of terror and its own kind of home. Somewhere below, Ron shouted cheerfully that a gnome had bitten him. The house went on, and the two of them stood on the fourth stair, the one that always cried out, and it did not cry out now because neither of them was moving. They were only standing there, close, burning toward each other in the gray ordinary light, learning the first hard lesson of being one thing in two bodies, that the soul might be single, but the life you had to live with it was still, stubbornly, going to be shared with everyone else in the house, and lied to, and loved, and gotten through, one breakfast at a time. Chapter 2. The Length of a Held Breath. Hermione measured everything because measuring was the only prayer she knew. She had a notebook now. A plain black one she bought Muggle from a stationer's on the Charing Cross Road because a magical one might be read and a plain one would only be thrown away. On the first page, in her small upright hand, she had written the date and the words, "What WER?" And under that a single line she kept returning to and could not improve. 1 flame. 2 lamps, unknown quantity of oil. And under that, a column of numbers that had begun to frighten her, though she had not yet told Harry how much. The numbers were distances. It had been her idea and Harry had hated it, and she had done it anyway, because the alternative was to spend the rest of their lives, however long that turned out to be, not knowing where the edge was. Hermione had a horror of not knowing where the edge was. It was, if she was honest with herself, the oldest fear she owned. Older than the war. Older than magic. Older than the letter that had come for her at 11 and turned her strange life stranger. She had grown up small and clever and unpopular, and the one thing that had ever kept her safe was knowing precisely how far a thing could go before it went wrong. How far she could push a teacher, how long she could hold an argument, how much she could hold an argument, how much she could care before people started backing away. She had built her whole self on the accurate location of edges. And now she was one half of something that had no map, and she would rather walk to the edge of it herself, notebook in hand, than wait for the war to walk her there blind. "You understand this is mad," Harry had said 3 days ago on the first morning of the experiment. They had been standing in the dank little yard behind Grimmauld Place, and she had been holding a long ball of Muggle string. "I understand it's frightening," she'd said. "Those aren't the same word. Hold the end of this." The string had been the first version, and it had been crude, and it had worked. She'd given him one end and walked away with the other, unspooling as she went, counting her paces, and at 40 feet, she'd measured the string afterward. 40 feet and some inches, she had felt the first tug, not on the string, on the note. The low, unbroken tone that had run under everything since the night in the kitchen had, at 40 feet, developed a strain in it. The way a rope develops a creak before you can see it stretch. At 60 feet, she'd had to stop because the strain had become an ache, low in the breastbone. The exact place a long-distance runner feels the stitch, except it was not in her side, it was in the part of her that had no anatomy. The part the old book called the wick. She had come back. The ache had eased with every pace toward him until, at about 10 feet, it had smoothed out entirely into the warm, sustained hum she was learning to think of as true, the sound of the note at rest. And Harry had been standing there white-faced with his end of the string wrapped twice around his fist, and he had said, "Don't do that again." And she had written down 60 fit, pain onset, and done it again the next day. Further, that was the thing Harry did not understand about her, the thing he loved and feared in equal measure and could now feel directly, which was that fright had never once stopped her doing anything. It had only ever made her do it with better notes. Now it was the 3rd day, and they had graduated from string to a proper plan, and Hermione stood at the top of the road with her notebook, and Harry stood 140 feet away at the bottom, by the lamppost, a small dark figure with his hands in his pockets pretending to be a boy waiting for someone. They had agreed on 140 feet as today's limit. They had agreed on hand signals. They had agreed, at Harry's flat insistence, that if either of them raised a fist, they would both walk toward each other immediately and the experiment was over. No argument. No just one more reading. Hermione lifted her hand, palm out. "Ready." Down the road, Harry lifted his. "Ready." She began to walk backward, away from him, up the hill, counting under her breath. It was a gray London Saturday and the street was nearly empty. A woman 2 gardens down was pegging out washing that would never dry in this weather, and a cat sat in a window watching Hermione retreat with the flat contempt of cats. 150. 160. The ache came up out of the ground like damp familiar now, and she breathed into it the way the pamphlet her mother had once given her said to breathe into a cramp, and she kept her eyes on the small distant Harry and kept walking. 170 feet. The note thinned. She stopped writing. She could not write and feel this at the same time. The feeling took all of her hands. The note, the single sustained thing that was, she had come to understand, not a sound they shared, but the actual sound of the soul being one, had begun to waver, to flatten at the edges. It was the sound a held breath makes in the chest of a person who has held it a beat too long, still there, still full but no longer comfortable, beginning to cost. And under it, worse, a new thing, a fraying. She felt the note begin to fray the way a rope frays, one fiber at a time, each parting fiber a tiny bright, wrong sensation somewhere she could not point to, and she understood with a lurch of pure animal fear that the note was not infinitely long, it could be stretched. And a thing that can be stretched can, at some length she did not know and was, God help her, trying to find, be stretched until it, down the hill, Harry's fist went up. She had promised she would come the instant he raised his fist, and for one cold second, she would be ashamed of the second for the rest of her life, and would never quite manage to regret it. She did not come. She stood at 170-something feet with the note fraying in her chest and thought, not yet, I almost have the number. One more reading and I'll know where the edge is, and being the person who knew where the edge was felt, for that 1 second, worth more than the promise. Then Harry started running. He was not supposed to run. The plan was that they walked toward each other, calm, controlled, taking readings as the note reformed. Instead, Harry was sprinting up the hill toward her, coat flying, and she felt why before she understood it. He had felt her hesitate. He had felt the fraying too, of course he had. It was one note, it frayed at both ends, and he had felt her decide, for 1 second, to keep going anyway. And the fear that put into him was not fear for himself, it was fear of her, of what she would spend to get her number, and it had picked him up off the pavement and thrown him up the hill. Hermione dropped the notebook and ran to meet him. They met somewhere around the middle near the washing that would never dry, and the note snapped taut, and then loose, and then, as they got within 20 feet, 10, 5 came flooding back whole so fast and so warm that Hermione actually staggered, the relief of it. Physical, her knees going soft, and Harry caught her by both arms and held her up, and they stood there in the middle of the empty gray road gasping like two people who had been underwater. "Never," Harry said. He was furious. She could feel that he was furious, and she could feel exactly what his fury was made of, which was terror. 90% terror and 10% love and no room at all for anything else. "You promised. I raised my fist and you didn't come. I felt you not come, Hermione. I felt you decide." "I know." Her voice was not steady. "I know. I'm sorry. Do you understand what it felt like?" And here his fury broke, the way weather breaks, all at once into something that was worse to feel than anger. It felt like watching someone lean off a bridge to read the drop. It felt like you were getting further away, and the further you got, the less of you there was. That's what it does, Hermione. The further apart we are, the less there is of both of us. I could feel myself getting thin. I could feel me getting thin, like the color draining out of a photograph. And the last clear thing I could feel from you was you deciding it was worth it, that you'd rather have the number than come back. His hands tightened on her arms. "Don't you ever make me feel you'd choose the number over coming back. I would rather never know where the edge is. I would rather walk off it holding your hand and stand safe on this side of it and feel you lean off it alone." And Hermione, who had spent her whole life needing to know where the edge was, stood in the road and felt the shape of the one thing that was bigger than her need to know, and it was this, that Harry Potter would genuinely, without hesitation, choose ignorance and death beside her over safety and knowledge. Without her, she found it appalling. She found it the most reckless value system she had ever encountered. She found that she could feel, underneath her horror at it, that she agreed, that some new part of her, the part that had grown in since the kitchen, would also rather walk off the edge holding his hand than stand safe and thin without him. And she was furious at that part, because it was going to get them both killed, and it was also, she understood, the truest part. The part that was actually the soul and not the girl. "We can't do this again," Harry said. "The distance, promise me for real this time. Not the promise where you hold the fist rule and then break it, the real one. We have to know where the edge, no. Harry, no, Hermione." And he did something then that stopped her, which was that he let go of her arms and stepped back, deliberately. 1 step, 2, opening a foot of gray air between them, and she felt the note strain even at that tiny distance now, because they were both raw, both stretched thin from the experiment, and he watched her face register the strain and he said, "Lo, you feel that? At 3 feet? We did that. We made ourselves so easy to hurt that 3 feet aches now. And you want to go find the length where it kills us and write it in your book so that if it ever comes for us, we'll know the exact moment we're dying." He stepped back in, and the note eased, and she nearly wept at the easing. "I don't want the number. I don't want to know the length of the leash. Because knowing it won't help us survive it, Hermione. It'll just tell us how to grieve on schedule. And I have grieved enough on schedule for one life." She looked at him. The washing flapped. The cat had dawned. "All right," she said. And this time, she meant the real promise. She bent and picked up the notebook from where she dropped it in the road, and she looked at the column of numbers, 60 feet, pain onset and 90 feet, ache constant and 140 feet, node waivers, and the last one she'd never written, the reading she nearly killed them both to take, and she closed the book on all of it. No more distance. I'll find another way to know things. There's always another way to know things. She looked up at him and made herself say the harder part, the part that was an apology and a confession at once. "I didn't choose the number, Harry. For a second, you felt it right. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm telling you, so you know it about me, that there's a part of me that will always, always want to know the thing more than she wants to be safe, and that part nearly leaned off the bridge today. And you're the reason I didn't. So don't ever leave, all right? Because I'm not safe on my own. I never was. I just used to be the only one who could see the edge, so nobody worried." Harry didn't say anything. He took her hand, the notebook hand, and they walked back down the hill together. Close, closer than two friends walk. Close enough that the note stayed warm and whole the whole way. The near disaster came, absurdly, at a bus stop. They had to cross the high street to get back to the square, and the high street on a Saturday was a river of people, and Hermione, raw, thinned, still feeling the ghost of the fraying in her chest, misjudged it. She stepped off the curb a half-second before Harry into a gap in the crowd, and a double-decker went past between them. Red and enormous and slow, and for the length of that bus, 6 or 7 seconds, there were 40 feet of moving metal and a wall of strangers between them, and Hermione felt the note stretch and catch and begin to strain. It was nothing. It was 6 seconds. On any ordinary day she would not have noticed. But she was not ordinary today. She was rubbed raw down to the wick, and the strain came up out of the pavement like the whole morning's terror returning for an encore, and she did a thing she had never done in her life, which was to actually shove both hands, muggle and undignified, through a knot of shoppers to get back to him. And she came out the other side of the bus's wake straight into Harry, who had done exactly the same thing from his side, so that they would Sorry, Harry said to the woman. Sorry. And to Hermione, low, with his hands closing hard on her shoulders, it was a bus. It was 6 seconds and a bus. I know. You went white. I know. I felt you go white too, so we can stop pretending it was only me. She got a fistful of his coat and did not let go and let the crowd break around the two of them like water around a post and breathed. That's what I hate, Harry. Not the far edge. That a bus can do it now. That a queue at the till could do it. Or a revolving door, or we've made ourselves into people who can be hurt by a bus timetable. Ordinary things. The world is full of 6-second gaps, and every one of them is a small rehearsal for the big one. He didn't argue with her, because she was right, and because he could feel that she needed the fear witnessed more than she needed it soothed. He just kept his hands on her shoulders in the middle of the moving crowd, an island, until the note settled back to warm and whole, and then he took her hand again, properly this time, laced. The grip you don't lose in a crowd, and they crossed the rest of the high street welded at the palm, moving as one thing through the river of Saturday, and did not let a single further gap open between them, not for a bus, not for a door, not for anything, all the way home. That night, the thinness would not leave her. She had expected it to. She had expected the note to knit back to its resting hum the way it always had, warm and whole, once they were under the same roof again. And it did knit. She could feel Harry 2 floors up, a steady coal of him banked in the dark, and it should have been enough. But the experiment had done something the string had never done. It had shown her for one long stretched second at 170 feet, what she was like when there was less of her, and now she could not unknow it. She lay in the narrow bed in the room that had been some Black Daughter's, and she catalogued herself in the dark, and found to her horror that she could still feel the ghost of the thinning, a faint, permanent awareness, now, of the edges of herself, where before she had simply been herself all the way out to her skin without ever thinking about it. This, she understood, was the true price of the experiment, and it was not a price you could write in a notebook. She had gone looking for the edge, and she had not found the far edge, the killing one, but she had found the near one, the everyday one, and having found it, she could feel it always now. The way a tongue finds a chipped tooth and cannot leave it. She knew where she ended. She had never known that before. It was a terrible thing to know. She got up at 2 by the honest clock and went to the library, because the library was the only room in the house that had ever reliably held her fear, and she lit the lamp low and pulled down the old book, the pre-statute one bound in something she still would not name, and she went looking for the thing she had been avoiding for a week. She found it 3/4 of the way through, in a section the cramped brown hand that headed on the sundering of lamps, and she read it standing up, because she did not trust herself to sit. It was a case. That was the thing about the old books that the ministry ones lacked. They did not moralize, they recorded, and this one recorded, in the flat, pitiless way of a coroner, the account of 2 lamps in some century it did not bother to name, a brother and sister, or perhaps not. The hand was ambiguous, born a single soul into 2 bodies in a village the hand also did not name. They had lived, the account said, in such accord that the village took them for one witch wearing 2 faces. And then a lord had wanted the sister. The account did not soften this, and had taken her 3 days' ride distant, over water, thinking distance and water would cool the brother's objection. Hermione read what happened next twice, and then a 3rd time, and then she sat down after all, because her legs had made a decision for her. It had not cooled anything. It had, the account said, unstrung them both. The brother, at his end of the 3 days' ride, had begun on the first night to lose the use of the left side of his body. The side, the hand noted, toward the sea, toward her. By the 2nd day he could not speak. By the 3rd he lay as a lamp with the oil run out, breathing, warm and empty, his eyes open upon nothing. And the sister, 3 days' ride over the water in her lord's fine house, had gone the same way in mirror, losing the right of her, the side toward home, toward him, so that the 2 of them lay a sea apart in the self-same ruin, each the reflection of the other's dying, and no leech in either place could name the sickness, for there was only the great loneliness of a soul stretched past its length, and beginning, quietly, to let go of the 2 far ends of itself. The lord, the account said, had ridden the sister back in a panic on the 4th day, and she had recovered as she neared home, and the brother had recovered as she neared him, and by the time she crossed the last river the 2 of them were made whole and weeping, and the lord, who had meant only to have a wife, was so afeard of what he had near done, that he gave her back to her village and troubled them no more, and they lived. It is said, and were not parted again, and died, it is also said, within the same hour of the same night, being one thing to the last. Hermione closed the book. She sat in the low lamplight for a long time. Then she took out the black notebook, and she turned past the column of distances she had closed the cover on to a fresh page, and she wrote in her small upright hand, "They do not die apart of grief. They die apart because the soul cannot hold itself across too great a length. It lets go of the far ends first, left side, right side, the parts pointed away from the other. It is not sentiment, it is structural. And then, underneath, because she was a scientist even at 2 a.m, with her hands not quite steady, she wrote the thing that mattered. But it is recoverable if the distance is closed in time. The soul does not tear, it only lets go. And what is let go can be taken up again." And then she wrote the last line, the one that was not science, the one that was the true reason she had come down to the library at 2 a.m. to read the worst thing in the book on purpose. We were never in danger of grieving ourselves to death. We were in danger of forgetting we had a left side. I have to tell Harry, he needs to know it isn't about how much we love each other. It's about how far. Love won't save us from the distance. Only the distance will. She did not go back to bed. She felt Harry sleeping 2 floors up, the banked coal of him, the whole and resting note, and she kept watch over it the way you keep watch over a low fire on a cold night, and somewhere near dawn she felt him surface toward waking, felt him reach, still mostly asleep, across the dark house for the reassurance that she wants there. And what that bailed? Did it schwamagam schmim? You cannot take one of us anywhere. There is no anywhere that is only one of us, and she was so tired and so frightened and so entirely certain of that one fact that she fell asleep in the chair with the notebook open on her knee, keeping watch, and did not dream of the cupboard, or the river, or the sundering of lamps, but only of a low-banked fire that would not go out. The trouble was that the ward did not care about the length of a held breath. It came for them 4 days later in the form of Kingsley Shacklebolt's Patronus, a great silver lynx that padded through the wall of the kitchen at dinner and opened its mouth and spoke in Kingsley's low, steady voice, and every person at the table put down their fork. "The borough is compromised," the lynx said. "Snatchers on the lane. The family is safe and away. But the wards on Grimmauld may have been carried out on someone's shoe, we don't know. Split up tonight. Molly, take the little ones to the aunts. Remus has the Taunt's house. Potter." The lynx turned its silver head, and Harry felt Hermione go rigid beside him before the sentence finished, felt her understand it a full second before the words came. The two of them reading the future off the same page. "Potter, you go with Bill to the Shell Cottage on the coast. Granger, Weasley, you're wanted at the Lovegood contact point at first light. There's a package only Granger can authenticate. Move within the hour. Trust the pattern, not the plan." The lynx dissolved into silver smoke and was gone, and the smoke hung over the table and the clocks ticked, and nobody moved. Harry to the coast. Hermione inland. Hermione did the arithmetic before anyone said a word because she was the fastest in the room, and because it was the only arithmetic that mattered to her now. The Shell Cottage was in Cornwall. The Lovegood contact point was in Devon or Somerset, she wasn't sure. But it did not matter. Because either way, it was not 40 feet, it was not 170 feet, it was 150 miles. It was a distance with no number in her book, because the note did not survive to 150 miles. The note did not survive to 1 mile. They had learned that the note began to fray at 170 feet. And here was the war calmly proposing to put a county between the two halves of a single soul and call it Nightyke. Everyone looked at her. She was standing. She had not decided to stand. "That's not, I can't go to the Lovegood point," she said, and heard how it sounded, heard herself, the sensible one, the one who always did as the order asked, refusing a direct instruction from Kingsley Shacklebolt in front of the whole table. Ron was staring at her. Mrs. Weasley had her hand at her throat. Harry and I have to stay together. It's not safe otherwise. It's not." And she could not finish it. Because the true reason was unspeakable, and every reason that was not the true one sounded, out loud, like a girl who couldn't bear to be parted from a boy, and she watched that interpretation land on every face at the table, and could do nothing to stop it. Hermione. "Mrs. Missers." Weasley's voice was gentle and terrible. "Sweetheart, I know it's hard, but this is exactly the sort of thing you know who counts on. That will keep the people we love close and make ourselves easy to find. Splitting up is how we stay alive. Harry will be perfectly safe with Bill, and you're needed. That package, I know I'm needed." Her voice cracked on it. Under the table, out of sight, Harry's hand had found hers and was gripping it hard, and through it she could feel him. Feel him trying to be calm for her. Feel the effort of it. Feel the same landslide of no going through him that was going through her, and feel, underneath, something worse than his fear, which was his resignation. He had already started to accept it. He had spent his whole life having the people he loved taken away by voices at tables saying, "It's for the best," and some old broken part of him had already begun. God had already begun to let go of her hand. Not physically, he was still gripping it, but somewhere inside, in the room she lived in now, she felt him begin the awful practice work of preparing to survive without her, because it was what he knew how to do. It was the only thing anyone had ever taught him, and that, not the danger, not the distance, not the county about to open between them. That was what made Hermione do the most reckless thing she had ever done. "We're one soul," she said. The table went silent in a new way. "Hermione," Harry said, low, warning, but she felt him not really mean it, felt the traitor hope leap up in him even as he warned her, and she pressed on. "I'm not being romantic. I'm not being a frightened girl. I'm telling you a fact, and you can lock me up for it or send me to St. Mungo's for it. But I am not going to 150 miles away from him and pretend I don't know what it'll do." She was shaking. She let herself shake. "Something happened this summer, to both of us. We don't understand it, and we've been trying to understand it, and we've told no one because we were afraid of exactly this table and exactly these faces, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry we didn't tell you, but I can't let you split us up on the strength of a secret. So here's the secret, Harry, and I share a soul. One soul. In two bodies. It's old magic, and it's real, and I have felt it and measured it, and it frays like a rope when we're pulled apart, and at 170 feet it hurts, and at a mile I don't know what happens because we've never been brave enough to find out, and you are proposing to send us 150 miles apart in the dark, and I would genuinely rather you stunned me and carried me to the coast in a sack tied to Harry's ankle than let you do it, because I think it might kill us, and I would like for once in my life to not find out the exact distance at which something kills me." Nobody spoke. The link smoke had finally cleared. Somewhere the tall clock, cracked and 4 minutes fast, chimed the half hour into a silence that had gone from confused to frightened to something Hermione could not name. Ron was the one who broke it. Ron, who had said nothing, who had been staring at their joined hands on the table where they'd forgotten to hide them, said in a strange flat voice, "That's what it's been. All summer. The pair of you looking at each other like you're having a conversation nobody else can hear." He wasn't angry. That was the awful part. Hermione had braced for anger and got instead something quieter and, much worse, a kind of recognition, as though a thing he'd been half seeing for weeks had finally turned its face to him. "You've been finishing each other's. I thought I was imagining it. You go still at the same time." You both flinched when the link said Cornwall, before it even said why. He looked at Harry. "Is it true? A soul? The two of you?" Harry looked back at him, and Hermione felt, across the note, the exact moment Harry decided to stop lying to Ron Weasley, felt it as a kind of unclenching, a long-held thing set down, and she remembered the promise on the stairs, "We don't let it make us smaller. We tell Ron eventually," and she understood that eventually had just become now, chosen for them by a silver lynx and a county, and that some part of Harry was almost grateful to the war for forcing the honest thing he'd been too afraid to do. And into the silence that followed, the whole table rearranging its understanding of the two of them. Mrs. Weasley's hand still at her throat, Ron's face doing something complicated and brave. Hermione felt for the first time since the lynx had walked through the wall, the note steady, because whatever came next, whatever the order decided, whatever the distance the war tried to put between them, it would not be able to do it in secret anymore. The secret had been the most dangerous thing they carried. It had made them liars at breakfast and left them defenseless against a Patronus at dinner. And now it was on the table, in the open, appalling and true, and Hermione found that she could breathe. "Right," said Mrs. Bowes. Weasley, very faintly, sitting down without seeming to decide to. "Right. Well, nobody's going anywhere for a moment then. Ron, put the kettle on. And somebody had better tell me everything from the beginning, because I have raised 7 children and I have never once heard anything like this, and if what you're telling me is true, then Kingsley's plan is going to get you both killed, and we are not doing that." "Kettle, Ron." Ron got up and put the kettle on. His hands were not quite steady. He looked at Harry and Hermione's joined hands one more time, and then he looked away, and Hermione felt her heart break a little for him, cleanly, the way you break bread, an honest tearing, no cruelty in it, the beginning of a grief they would all have to walk through together. But he'd put the kettle on. He was still here. He had not stood up and walked out into the dangerous night. He'd put the kettle on, which was the Weasley way of saying, "I don't understand this, and I'm frightened, and I'm not leaving." Under the table, Harry's thumb moved once across the back of Hermione's hand. "You did that," he told her, without words. "You told them. I never could have. I broke every rule we made," she answered the same way. "No more distance. No more secrets. In one dinner." She felt him almost laugh. "Some rules are made to show you where the edge is," he said, and there was the tenderest possible mockery in it, throwing her own religion back at her gentle as a kiss, "so you know exactly the moment you're glad you crossed it." The kettle began slowly to sing, and the two halves of a single soul sat at a table full of frightened people who loved them, a county away from being torn apart, and now, because of one reckless honest girl, perhaps saved from it, and held hands where everyone could see, and did not let go, and let the long, dangerous held breath of the last 3 days out at last, together, into a room that finally knew. It took Remus Lupin to make it real, because Remus was the only one at the table who had spent his life being a thing the books said was impossible, and so he was the only one who did not waste an hour arguing that it couldn't be true. He arrived within the half hour, summoned by Mrs. Weasley's own Patronus, and he came in tired and gray and shabby and sat down and listened to the whole of it. Hermione did most of the telling, precise, sourced, the notebook open on the table, now where anyone could see the column of distances and the coroner's flat account of the sundered lamps she'd copied out in the night, and when she finished, Remus did not tell her she was mistaken. He sat quiet for a moment, turning his teacup on its saucer, and then he said something that reorganized the whole table. "There's a reason the Order splits people up," he said. "It's sound doctrine. You make yourself hard to find and hard to lose all at once. But doctrine is a general thing, and the two of you are a specific thing, and the mistake armies always make. The mistake armies always make. The mistake I've watched get good people killed is applying the general rule to the specific case because the rule is easier to remember than the person." He looked at Kingsley's empty chair as though the man were in it. "Kingsley doesn't know what you are. He gave a good order to the wrong pair. That's not his failing. It's ours for keeping it from him. But we're not going to compound it by obeying an order that was written for two ordinary people about two people who are, whatever else they are, not that." He turned to Hermione, and his tired eyes were kind and very serious. "You said the account claimed it was recoverable. That closing the distance in time brings the soul back to its far ends. How much time?" "It doesn't say," Hermione admitted. 3 days in the account. But that was over water, and I don't know if water matters, and I don't know if their length was our length. Every pair might be different. The oil, I don't know. That's the whole problem. Everything I know says it's dangerous, and nothing I know says exactly how dangerous, and I refuse to find out by accident." "Then we don't find out by accident," Remus said simply. "We change the plan. The two of you go together, wherever you go, until we understand this well enough to know the risk we're taking." That's not sentiment, and it's not indulgence. It's the same cold logic the Order runs on. An asset that dies when you split it is an asset you don't split. I'll tell Kingsley you're a matched pair and can't be separated for operational reasons, and I won't tell him why, and he'll grumble and accept it because he trusts me and because he'd rather have two of you inconveniently together than two of you dead in 2 counties for a reason he'll never be allowed to read in any file. He almost smiled, the ghost of it. You'd be astonished how much the war will tolerate if you phrase it as logistics. Something eased in the room. Mrs. Weasley let out a long breath and got up to see about food, because food was her Patronus, and the danger receded from the immediate to the merely enormous, and the table began, slowly, to become a kitchen again instead of a tribunal. It was Ron who caught Harry alone, later on the landing, when the others had scattered to pack the go-bags nobody was going to need tonight, after all. So, Ron had his hands jammed in his pockets. He wasn't meeting Harry's eyes, which meant he was about to say something that mattered. "One soul. The pair of you." "Yeah. Since when?" "We figured it out this summer." "But," Harry made himself say it because he owed Ron the whole ugly shape of it and not the comfortable half, but Hermione thinks it's always been there. Since we were 11. Since the troll, maybe. She thinks we've been. She calls it burning toward each other. The whole time. We just didn't have a word for it. Ron nodded slowly, still looking at the wallpaper. And Harry braced because he could feel Hermione 2 rooms away holding her own breath about this. Both of them braced because Ron had spent years somewhere in the tangled middle of the two of them, closer to Hermione some years than Harry was. And there was a version of this moment where Ron was hurt in a way that did not heal. But Ron surprised him. Ron usually did at the moments it counted. "You know the maddening thing," Ron said. "It's not even a surprise. That's what's doing my head in. If you told me you two had had a row, that'd have surprised me. If you told me you'd snogged, that'd have surprised me and I'd have needed a lie down. But you telling me you're one soul in 2 bodies, some part of me just went, oh, right, yeah, that. That explains it. That explains the whole 7 years." He finally looked at Harry and his ears were red but his eyes were steady. "I spent a lot of time being narked about the pair of you and never being able to say why, because there was nothing to be narked about. You never did anything. You were just, there was always a door the two of you were behind that I couldn't find the handle of, and I used to think that was you shutting me out. And it turns out it wasn't a door you built. It's a door you are." He shrugged, a rough, helpless motion. "Can't be narked about a bloke for being a shape. Might as well be narked at a river for being wet." "Ron, don't." Ron held up a hand. "Don't get soft about it. I'll only say something stupid. I'm telling you I'm all right. Or I'm going to be. I've got some being all right to do and I'd rather do it without you feeling it happen. If that's all the same to you. So tell Hermione to stop listening in through your chest. I can feel her worrying at me from the box room." He said it almost fondly. "Both of you. Always at me. One soul between you and you still can't mind your own business." And Harry laughed and felt Hermione 2 rooms away go loose with relief so sharp it was almost pain, and Ron heard the laugh and rolled his eyes and shoved off the wall and went to pack a bag he wouldn't need, and it was, in the end, all right. Not mended. There would be things to mend, and grief to walk through, and Harry was not fool enough to think one good speech on a landing fixed 7 years of a friend standing outside a door. But alright. Ron had put the kettle on. Ron had called it a shape you couldn't be narked at. Ron was still here. Mrs. Weasley found Hermione alone in the scullery an hour later, drying the same cup she had been drying for some minutes without noticing, and she did not say any of the things Hermione had braced for. She did not ask whether it was safe or sensible, or whether Hermione understood what she was letting herself in for at 17. She took the cup and the cloth out of Hermione's hands and set them down and looked at her with the particular attention of a woman who had spent her life reading the weather of people she loved. "When I married Arthur," she said, "my mother told me I was too young and it was too much and I was building my whole life on one person and what would I do if I lost him? And she wasn't wrong to worry. She was right about every single risk. And I did it anyway. And I have spent 30 years being glad. And also, I have spent 30 years knowing that if I lost him, I would not be a whole person for a long time. Maybe ever." She folded the cloth. "So I'm not going to tell you it's too much, sweetheart, because I don't believe there's such a thing as too much when it comes to the people you're made for. But I am going to tell you the thing my mother should have told me instead of the warnings, which is this. Don't disappear into it. That's the only danger worth a name. Not that you'll love him too much, there's no such thing. That you'll stop being Hermione and start being only half of Harry and Hermione, and lose the girl who reads too much and argues with her teachers and cares about the wrong things too loudly. Keep her." He didn't fall in love with a half. Nobody worth having ever does. You keep every stubborn inch of yourself and you give him all of it, and that's not a contradiction. That's the whole trick of it, and it took me 20 years to learn it, and I'm giving it to you for free because we may not have 20 years. Any of us, the way things are. Hermione, who had been braced against pity, and against warnings, and against every form of being managed, found that she had no defense at all against being simply told the truth by a woman who had lived it, and she put her face against Mrs. Weasley's shoulder, and Mrs. Weasley held her as she held all her children, fiercely and briefly, and then set her back and looked at her and nodded once. Business concluded. "Right," Mrs. Weasley said. "I'm putting you both in the box room. 2 beds. I'll not have the pair of you 2 floors apart giving yourselves that gray look I saw on you at dinner. Not now I know what it costs you. And if anyone in this house has an opinion about the sleeping arrangements, they can bring it to me and I will explain to them about souls, and they will find they have somewhere else to be." She picked a cloth back up. "Go on. You look like you haven't slept since June. Which, now I think of it, you told me you hadn't." And she turned back to the washing up, and Hermione understood that the conversation was over, and that she had, without asking for it, been given something she had not had since she erased herself from her own parents' memory. A mother in the house who knew the worst and had decided to help anyway. That night, Harry and Hermione did not sleep 2 floors apart. Nobody said anything more about it. Mrs. Weasley simply made up the second bed in the box room without comment, the way she'd have done for 2 frightened children after a nightmare. And if she understood that it was not quite that, she kept it to herself, because she had raised 7 children and she knew the difference between what needs discussing and what needs allowing. They lay in the dark with the narrow gap between the beds, close enough that the note stayed warm and whole and did not fray at all. And Hermione told him about the sundered lamps, the brother and sister, the sea, the losing of the left side and the right, the coroner's flat account of a soul letting go of its 2 far ends. She told him because he needed to know it wasn't about how much they loved each other, it was about how far, and love wouldn't save them from the distance. Only the distance would. Harry was quiet for a while after she finished. Then he said, into the dark, the left side, toward her. "That's the part I keep." He lost the side of himself that pointed at her first. Yes. So even when he was dying alone in a room 3 days' ride away, the last part of him to go was the part aimed at where she was. "Yes," Hermione said, and heard her own voice go thick. "Then he wasn't dying alone," Harry said. "That's the only good thing in the whole story. Nobody who dies still aimed at someone dies alone. He died with his left side pointed at her across the whole sea. That's not the great loneliness the book called it. That's the opposite. That's a compass that never once stopped knowing north, even when north was too far away to reach." He was quiet again. "I'd take that. If it ever comes to it, I'd rather lose my left side aimed at you than keep all of me aimed at nothing." Hermione lay in the dark and could not answer, because there was no answer, because he had taken the worst thing in the book and found the one grain of grace in it and handed it to her like a boy handing over the last good apple. And this was the difference between them that no shared soul would ever erase. She read the horror and mapped its structure so she could survive it, and he read the horror and found, buried in it, the one place a person could stand and not be destroyed, and held it her. She reached across the gap between the beds. He met her halfway, and the note held, warm and whole and unfrayed, all the way to morning. One soul keeping watch over itself from 2 pillows, aimed, always, unmistakably, at north. Chapter 2. End. Chapter 3. What one hand does the package was a memory, and it was buried under a chapel, and it did not want to be found. That was how Luna's father explained it. At any rate, over a breakfast of things Harry chose not to identify, in a printing house that leaned so far over the printing house next door that the two buildings seemed to be whispering, Xenophilius Lovegood had been holding the contact for the Order not because he was reliable, he was the least reliable man Harry had ever met, but because no one, on either side of the war, could predict a single thing he would do, which turned out to be its own kind of security. He kept the package's location in a code only he understood, spoke of it as though it were a shy animal, and would surrender it, he said, only to someone who could authenticate true, which was why Kingsley had wanted Hermione, whose command of authentication charms was the best in the Order under 60. It knows if you're whole, Xenophilius said, apropos of apparently nothing, spreading something purple on his toast. The memory. That's the old trick of it. You can't lift it with a borrowed hand or a false face or a fractured intent. It reads the lifter. If the lifter is cracked, it stays put. Clever old thing. It's been down there since before the chapel, you know? The chapel was built on top of it to keep it quiet. He beamed at Hermione. You'll do splendidly, I expect. You have very authentic eyes. Hermione, to her credit, did not roll them. Harry felt her not roll them, felt the effort, and felt underneath the effort, a fine-tuned attention sharpening because Xenophilius, for all his purple toast, had said something that mattered. It reads the lifter. If the lifter is cracked, it stays put. It was Luna who saw it first, though, and Luna who said it out loud, which was a thing Harry should have expected and somehow never did. She came down the spiral stair while her father was still spreading purple things on toast, barefoot, dreamy, a butterbeer court necklace at her throat, and she stopped 3 steps from the bottom and looked at Harry and Hermione sitting side by side at the crooked table, and she tilted her head as she did when she was looking at something the rest of the world had agreed not to see. "Oh," Luna said, "there's only one of you." The kitchen went quiet. Ron, halfway through a suspicious sausage, put his fork down. "I mean, there's 2 of you," Luna went on, unbothered, coming the rest of the way down. "Obviously, 2 chairs, 2 teacups. But there's one, the thing behind you. Usually people have one each, trailing about behind them like a shadow, only it's in front as well, and all the way through. You've got one between you. It goes from him, into the middle, and out into her. And it doesn't stop at the edges where people usually stop." She sat down across from them and reached for the teapot as though she had said nothing remarkable at all. "It's very bright. I expect that's why you both look so tired. Bright things are tiring to carry, and you've been carrying it up and down stairs all summer trying to work out what it is, haven't you, when you could have just asked? Most bright things would rather be asked than measured." Hermione had gone very still. "You can see it," she said. "You can actually see it. Luna, no one. We've been so careful, no one's supposed to be able to. No one's supposed to be able to see rackspurts either," Luna said serenely, pouring. "It doesn't stop them being there. You just have to not mind looking foolish, and then all sorts of things become visible." She looked up, and for a moment the dreaminess parted and there was something underneath it that was neither vague nor foolish at all. Something that had watched its own mother die at 9 years old and had come out the other side gentler rather than harder, which is the rarest kind of strength there is. You should be careful though. Not of me. I won't tell, and anyway who'd believe me? That's rather the point of me. But a thing that bright, other people will feel it even if they can't see it, the way you feel a fire in the next room through the wall. And not everyone who feels a fire wants to warm their hands at it. Some people just don't like that they're cold, and a fire reminds them, and then they want to put it out. She went back to her tea. "Daddy's memory will love you though. It's been lonely down there under the chapel for ever such a long time. It'll be glad someone whole finally came." And that, Harry thought, was Luna entire. She had seen in one glance the thing they'd hidden for 2 months, named the danger they'd spent whole nights reasoning toward, and reassured a 1,000-year-old buried memory of its loneliness, all before her first cup of tea, and meant every word, and would not remember by lunchtime that she'd said anything unusual at all. Hermione reached across the table and squeezed Luna's hand, once, and Luna looked mildly pleased, and neither of them said anything because with Luna, the not saying was its own kind of thanks. Neither Harry nor Hermione said anything more about it until they were outside, walking the lane toward the chapel with Ron a few steps ahead, kicking a stone. They didn't need to. Harry felt her arrive at it the same instant he did. Felt the 2 halves of the thought click together across the note like 2 people finishing a crossword from opposite sides of the page. A memory that reads the lifter and stays put, if the lifter and stays put, if the lifter is cracked. And what was a soul torn into 7 pieces, hidden in 7 vessels, if not the most cracked lifter in the history of the world? Voldemort could not have lifted this thing if he'd stood on the chapel roof and screamed for it. It was, in the most literal sense, wholeness locked, which meant that whatever was down there was something the enemy had been unable to reach for reasons he could not even perceive, because a man who has broken his own soul into pieces cannot see wholeness any more than a blind man can see a color. He would walk over it and never know. We can lift it, Hermione thought, and Harry felt the cold thrill of it go through her. Not just me. Us. If it reads the lifter and it wants whole, Harry, there has never in the history of the world been anything more whole than we are. We're not just uncracked, we're a soul that survived being two and stayed one. If that thing wants authentic, we're the most authentic hands that have ever reached for it. Careful, Harry thought back, and felt her prickle at being told to be careful and softened it, because he was learning the exact pressure of her, the way you learn the give of a door. I mean, Luna's dad said it reads intent, so whatever we go down there feeling, it's gonna feel it too. We should know what we want before we touch it, not just that we can. Ron, up ahead, turned round and walked backward. You're doing it again, he said. The silent thing. I can always tell now, you both go a bit glassy. It's like watching two people play chess with no board. He said it without rancor. He'd found over the past weeks a way to be near it that cost him less, a running commentary that turned the uncanny thing into a joke he was in on, rather than a door he was outside of. Whatever you've decided, can the rest of us hear it out loud? Some of us have to think in words like animals. The memory reads whoever lifts it, Hermione said. It stays buried unless the lifter's soul is whole. That's why Voldemort's never got it. He couldn't. He's the least whole thing alive. And she glanced at Harry. We think we might be able to, because of what we are. Ron considered this. So the plan is the two of you stick your hands in a magic hole that judges your soul on the strength of a theory you came up with 4 minutes ago based on something Luna's dad said while eating a purple. Yes, Hermione admitted. Brilliant, said Ron. Love it. No notes. I'll stand by the door and scream if anything goes wrong, which is my specialty. And he turned round again and kept walking. And Harry felt Hermione's reluctant affection for him warm the note and thought, not for the first time, that Ron's real gift had never been magic. It had been the ability to say the frightening thing out loud in a way that made it survivable. He'd been doing it for 7 years. He was doing it now. The chapel was small and disused and smelled of cold stone and pigeon. The package, the memory, was under the floor, Xenophilius had said, beneath the third flagstone from the altar, and it took them the better part of an hour to lift the flagstone, which did not want to be lifted, and to find beneath it not a box, not a vial, not anything Harry had braced for, but a shallow depression in the earth in which sat a single stone, round and gray and utterly ordinary, the kind of stone you'd skip across a pond without a second look. That's it? Ron said from the door. That's it! Hermione breathed. And Harry felt her reach out with her senses the way she'd taught herself to over the summer, felt her brush the stone with something that wasn't touch, and felt her recoil. It's full, she said. It's Harry, it's so full. There's decades in there. Somebody put decades in there, somebody put decades into that stone. It's like she groped for it. It's like a well that goes down further than the ground should allow, and it's locked. I can feel the lock. It's not a spell lock. It's the thing Mr. Lovegood said. It's shaped like a person. There's a person-shaped hole in the top of it. And the only key that fits is a whole soul reaching in with the right intent. So reach in, Ron said. It's not that simple. Hermione had gone still, and Harry felt the reason before she said it, felt the fear come up cold and specific. If it reads intent, and we reach in wanting to take it, to use it, to win with it, I think it'll read that as a hand closing round a throat. It's been kept safe from grasping for 1,000 years. It'll know grasping when it feels it. We can't reach in wanting. We have to reach in. She looked at Harry, helpless for the word, offering. We have to reach in the way you'd cup your hands under someone's face who was crying. Not to take. To hold. And that, Harry understood, was the whole test, and it was not a test of power. It was a test of what you were like at the deepest place, the place below strategy, and below the war, and below even fear. And there was no faking it, because the stone would feel the faking. You could not decide to be whole for the length of one reach. You either were, or you weren't all the way down. Together, he said. Together, she said. It's the only way I'd trust it. If it's just me, I'll want it. I always want to know things. You know I do? I'll reach in, and some part of me will be greedy for the decades. I won't be able to help it, and it'll feel the greed and slam shut. But if you're with me. She stopped, and he felt her find the true thing. If you're with me, you'll hold the wanting still. You always do. You're the thing that makes my hunger safe, and I'm the thing that makes you'll reach in ready to give it everything. Ready to pour yourself into it, and you won't stop. You never stop. You'd empty yourself out for a stone if a stone needed it. And I'll be the one who holds the giving still so it doesn't take all of you. That is what we are, Harry. I'm your brake and you're my engine. Neither of us is safe to do this alone. Together we might be exactly the right shape. Harry looked at her for a long moment in the cold pigeon, smelling dark of the chapel, and he thought that in 7 years no one had ever described the two of them so precisely. Brake and engine, hunger and offering. And that it had taken a shared soul to say it, and then it was true. And that it was also the most frightening thing she'd ever asked him, because it meant reaching into the stone was going to require them to be more one than they had ever been, more merged, to move as a single hand, and some instinct he didn't examine yet raised. A small flag at that, a small unease, a whisper of, but where do I go when we're that much one? Where does the part of me that is only me go? And he pushed it down because Hermione needed him, and the stone was waiting. And the war did not stop for a philosophical flutter. "Tell me how," he said. This was how. They knelt on either side of the depression, and they each put out a hand, Hermione her right, Harry his left, the sides that had always pointed at each other, and they did not touch the stone. They touched each other first, palm to palm over the stone, the way they had in the kitchen on the first night, and the note swelled up warm and low and whole, and the house of each of them opened to the other. And Harry felt the familiar vertigo of the doubling, the wall gone, the 2 rooms, 1 room, and then, together, they lowered their joined hands toward the stone. He had thought it would be like the kitchen, only more. It was not more. It was different in kind, the way an ocean is different in kind from a lot of water. In the kitchen, they had opened to each other. Here, over the stone, they did something they had never done. They let go of the seam. All summer, even at their closest, there had been a seam, a place where Harry ended and Hermione began, a hairline felt rather than seen, the last faint memory of being two. And kneeling over the stone, reaching as one hand, they let the seam dissolve because the stone would not open to 2 hands pretending to be one, it wanted 1 hand actually. And so for the space of a few heartbeats, Harry Potter stopped being able to find the edge of himself at all. It was the most complete thing he had ever felt, and it terrified him, and both of those were the same fact. There was no Harry and Hermione. There was a single reaching. It had Harry's ferocity in it and Hermione's precision, Harry's willingness to burn and Hermione's refusal to be stupid about it, and it was not a blend, not a compromise, not a committee. It was a person, a third thing that was neither of them and both of them, a person who had never existed before and would not exist again. Once the seam, one that the seam of it and the seam tide daily. You know that the tide hair wharf say out the stone opened like a held breath let go, and the decades came out. They came out not as knowledge but as a life. Someone's whole life poured into stone 1,000 years ago and waiting all that time for a hand whole enough to receive it without grasping. A woman. Harry felt her. They felt her. The single reaching felt her. A witch of no name, the war would recognize, who had lived in the time when the old magic was still spoken aloud, and who had known what Harry and Hermione were, because she had been half of one herself. That was the memory. That was the whole of the package, and it was worth more than any weapon because it was the one thing in all the world they most needed and had been unable to find in any book, an account, from the inside, of a shared soul that had lived a long life and not been sundered. And how? She had lost her other half to a fever, the woman. Not to distance, not to a lord, not to a blade, to an ordinary fever. In an ordinary winter when they were both old, and she had not died with him, though the story said the 2 lamps died in the same hour. She had lived on, alone, for 11 more years. And into the stone she had poured the things she had learned in those 11 years. The things she wanted the next pair to know. Whoever they were, whenever they came. And the single reaching that was Harry and Hermione knelt in the cold chapel and received it whole. You are not one soul because you cannot bear to be 2. You are one soul so that you can bear to be 2. Do you understand me? You who are reading this with one hand, the oneness is not the treasure. The two-ness is the treasure. The oneness is the strength that lets you afford the two-ness, lets you argue and differ and choose against each other and go your 2 ways in a room, and never be diminished by it. Because underneath the 2 of you there is one of you holding the floor steady. Weak souls cling. They fear the seam. They want to dissolve it. They want to be one thing so that they never have to survive being 2. Do not do this. I beg you across 1,000 years, do not do this. The seam is not the wound. The seam is where you are still yourselves. Guard the seam. When you are most in love, when it is most tempting to pour yourself entirely into the other and never come back, that is the moment to find the seam and hold it, and be 2 on purpose, for love, because the greatest thing a whole soul can do is choose, again and again, to remain also 2. Anyone can be 1. It takes a whole soul to stay 2 and not break. The reaching received this. And then, because it was time, because the stone had given what it kept and a hand that only holds must eventually open, the single united person that was Harry and Hermione set the decades down gently and drew back and went looking for the seam, and for one bad moment could not find it. Harry would not tell Hermione for 2 days how close it had been. He would carry it alone first, because that was still some cracked old part of him, his instinct to carry the worst thing alone, and it would be one of the last times he did it, and he would be one of the last times he did it, and he would be ashamed of it later and forgive himself, because she forgave him. Because she'd felt the shape of the fear even without the details and let him keep the details until he was ready. But this was the truth of the moment in the chapel. When the reaching drew back and went looking for the seam, for the hairline where Harry ended and Hermione began, it was not there. They had dissolved it so completely to open the stone that for 3 or 4 heartbeats there was no line to draw back along, no fold to unfold, nothing to say this much is Harry, take it, and this much is Hermione, keep it. There was just the one person, and the one person did not want to become 2 again. Why would it? It was whole. It was strong. It was the most complete thing that had ever knelt on a chapel floor. Becoming two again meant taking on, once more, all the friction of being two people. The arguing, the differing, the small, daily failure to be perfectly understood, and the one person, in its first taste of the ease of oneness, looked at that friction and thought, with a serenity that was the most dangerous thing Harry had ever felt. Why go back to that? And it was the woman in the stone who saved them. Her last words, still ringing in the chapel of their shared skull. It takes a whole soul to stay two and not break. Somewhere in the one person. The part that was most Hermione. The part that could not stop being a scientist, even mid-dissolution. The part that had heard the warning and understood it as instruction. Reached for the seam not by finding it, but by making it. It's Mart Hanch. It's Macy. It's Tans Marmer Ants. It's Pinative Thesi are of the one mind. A small pointed difference of opinion. A place where Harry thought and Hermione thought did not match. And the mismatch was the seam. The mismatch was the fold. And Harry felt her hand him back his own edges the way you'd hand someone back their coat. Here, this is yours. Put it on. I know it's heavier than what we just had. I know it. And he put his edges and would quave. And he put them on and it was heavier. And he bade rail pult the valkeeter found he rags fade by the seam reformed tender and new. And they knelt over the closed gray stone, two people again, gasping, and Ron said from the doorway, "Well, did it work?" "You've been kneeling there for about a minute and a half looking like statues. I nearly came over. A minute and a half. It had been 1,000 years and 11 winters. It had been the whole life of a nameless witch, and the closest Harry had ever come to ceasing, gladly, to be himself. It worked," Hermione said. Her voice shook. She looked at Harry and there were tears on her face and he felt the exact make of them, relief and terror and a grief for the ease they'd let go of on purpose, and love, above all love. The specific love of someone who has just chosen you over the easier thing. "We have it. We have what she left. And Harry," she reached across the closed stone and gripped his wrist, hard, grounding edge to edge, two to two. "We have to talk about what nearly happened. Not now, not in front of, but soon. Because I felt it too. I felt how much the one of us didn't want to be the two of us again. And that's the thing that's going to be dangerous. Not the distance. I was wrong about the distance being the danger. The distance you can see coming. This you can't. This wants you to stay." "I know," Harry said, and did not say how much he'd wanted to stay. "Not yet. Not for 2 days." Ron came over and looked at the ordinary gray stone and picked it up and turned it over and said, "It's a rock." "It's the most valuable thing in England," Hermione said, wiping her face with the heel of her hand, becoming herself again, brisk and wet-eyed. "And if you skip it across a pond, I will end you." Ron put it down very carefully. They took the stone back to the leaning printing house and Xenophilius wept over it and gave them tea, and then they went home. The Snatchers found them on the lane. There were 4 of them, and they had been waiting. Not for Harry and Hermione specifically, Harry understood later, but for anyone. Because the lane to the Lovegood house had begun to attract the wrong sort of order traffic, and the wrong sort had noticed. They came out of the hedgerow on both sides at once, wands up, in the gray failing light, and the first Harry knew of it was Ron shouting and a jet of red light and the world tipping into the particular slowed clarity that Harry had learned to live inside during a fight. But it was not like other fights. That was the thing he would carry out of the lane, more than the bruises. In every duel of his life, Harry had fought alone even when he wasn't alone. You could stand shoulder to shoulder with an ally and still be 2 separate minds shouting spells into the same air, each guessing at the other, each a half second behind the other's intent, each occasionally throwing a curse into the space their friend was about to move into. That was the truth of fighting beside someone. You were company, but you were not coordination. Coordination was a thing you drilled for months and achieved for seconds. Harry and Hermione did not have to drill. The first Snatcher's curse came at Hermione's blind side from the left, and Harry felt it coming before he saw it, felt her not yet fear. The fraction of a second in which her body knew and her mind hadn't caught up, and his own wand was already moving, a shield blown across her left where his own left had always pointed. So that the curse broke in a protego that Hermione had not cast and did not need to cast. Because the hand that guarded her left was his. And in the same instant, because it was one motion, one reaching, her wand answered on his blind side. A stunner sent past Harry's right shoulder into the Snatcher he hadn't seen, the one closing from the hedge behind him, and it dropped the man mid-lunge, and Harry had never turned his head. They fought back to back without arranging it. There was no arranging it. Harry took the front and the left, Hermione took the right and the rear. And neither of them had to call the split because the split was not a decision, it was an anatomy. It was the way a single body assigns the left hand and the right hand, without holding a meeting about it. Harry did not have to watch his back because his back was hers, and she did not have to guard her left because her left was his, and between them, turning slowly in the middle of the lane with a Snatcher down at Ron's feet and another down at the hedge, they made a thing that no drilled Auror pair could make, because Aurors were 2 people trained to move like one, and Harry and Hermione were one thing occupying 2 positions, and the difference was the difference between an orchestra and a chord. The third Snatcher was cleverer. He saw what he was fighting, not the spells, he couldn't have named the spells, but the pattern, the horrible, seamless economy of it. 2 wands that never once got in each other's way. 2 people who never wasted a shield on a threat the other was already handling. And he did the thing a clever enemy does, which was to stop attacking and start thinking. And Harry felt Hermione mark him as the dangerous one the same instant he did. Split him, Harry thought, or Hermione thought. They split him. Hermione's curse drove the Snatcher left, Harry's drove him right, and a man cannot go left and right at once, and in the quarter second he spent choosing, Ron, who had been fighting his own honest, desperate fight at the edge of all this, one man against the odds, and holding, Ron's stunner took him in the chest, because Harry and Hermione had not been trying to hit the third Snatcher at all, they had been hurting him. Into Ron's line. And Ron, who could not read their minds, had read the situation, had seen the gap they were opening and understood it was a gift and taken it, and the Snatcher went down, and it was the three of them who done it. The two who moved as one, and the one who could still surprise them. And Harry thought fiercely, in the ringing aftermath, that the scene ran there too. That Ron was outside the soul but not outside the fight, and that a whole soul that forgot its friends was a poorer thing than one that them. The fourth Snatcher ran. He got perhaps 30 feet before Hermione dropped him with a body bind, unhurried, almost absent. Because by then the fight was already over in the place where fights are really decided, which is the place where one side knows it has lost. She lowered her wand. The lane was very quiet. Somewhere, a bird that had gone silent for the fighting tried a single uncertain note and thought better of it. And then Harry felt the price. Hermione had taken a curse, not the killing kind, a cutting hex, early in the first chaos before the coordination had fully caught them up, and it had opened a long line across her forearm, and she had kept fighting on it without a sound because she was Hermione, and because, Harry realized with a lurch, he had not felt it. He always felt it. He'd felt the tin of beans, the paper cut, the stubbed toe. He lived with the low, constant weather of her body, and he had not felt the cutting hex because in the white total focus of fighting as one thing they had done without meaning to, the very thing the woman in the stone had warned against. They had thinned the seam. To move that seamlessly, to be that much one hand, they had let the fold between them go slack, and with it had gone the fine reciprocal sense that would have told Harry the instant she was hurt. Union had made them lethal. It had also, for the length of the fight, made them slightly deaf to each other, because you cannot both dissolve into one reaching and keep the tender two-way listening that only exists across a seam. "You're hurt," he said, and his voice cracked on it because he should have known before she did. "It's shallow." She was already pressing her sleeve to it. "Harry, it's shallow, don't. I didn't feel it." He took her arm, peeled back the ruined sleeve, saw the clean red line of it, and felt something colder than any curse. "Hermione, you were cut and I didn't feel it. I always feel it." She went still. He watched her understand it, watched the scientist in her lift its head even here, even bleeding in a lane full of stunned men. "Because we went too far she said slowly. "In the fight. To move like that, we had to. The seam went slack. And when the seam goes slack, we're stronger, we're faster, we're one hand, but we stop being able to feel each other the way we do across the seam. It's a trade." Her eyes came up to his, and there was fear in them, and fascination, the two things she was never able to separate. "That's important, Harry. That's so important, Harry. The oneness makes us powerful and it makes us deaf. The more one we are, the less we can feel each other. It's a paradox. To feel each other we have to stay two. The closeness lives in the seam, not in the dissolving. When we dissolve, we don't get closer, we get simpler. And simpler isn't closer. Simpler isn't closer. Simpler is, she looked down at her cut arm. Simpler is how a person misses that. Their other half is bleeding. Ron limped over, nursing a scorched hand, and looked at the 4 down Snatchers, and looked at the two of them standing far too close over a bleeding forearm, having what was visibly another one of their silent conversations, and said, "You know, most people, after a fight like that, say, 'Thanks, Ron.' Just as a thing people say, 'Ting,' with 27 minor." Hermione said at the same time in the same breath, and Ron threw up his good hand and said, "Oh, brilliant, now they're doing it out loud, that's much better, that's not eerie at all," and stumped off to check the Snatchers for anything useful, and Harry felt Hermione's laugh come up through her fear like a bubble through deep water, and healed the cut on her arm himself, carefully, with the seam held wide open nitimeter of it, nithes, where Thurkykade the bulls from in the mile, Persil, with the Cade had her ara himself, to usapout heltekidwoods kedamabib. It was on the last stretch home after that, walking the final approach to the safe house under a sky bruising toward dusk. Ron a little ahead, as always. Hermione's healed arm looped through Harry's, that Harry finally began to understand what union was for. Because now that he'd tasted it, he could not stop noticing the smaller version of it, the safe version, the version they lived in every day and had stopped remarking on. He and Hermione had lifted a flagstone that neither could have lifted alone. Not because two people are stronger than one, any two people could have levered a flagstone, but because the stone had judged them and found them whole, and wholeness had been the crowbar. He thought about the summer. He thought about the number of times in the last 2 months that Hermione had held his hunger still, or he had lent her his ferocity, without either of them naming it as strength. She did not tire as she once had when she worked. He'd felt her draw more than once, on some banked reserve that turned out to be his. His stubbornness poured quietly into her exhaustion at 3 in the morning over a book, and he did not despair as he once had. The black tides that had pulled at him since Sirius, since Cedric, since the graveyard, still came, but they no longer took him all the way under, because there was a floor now, a floor that was her, holding steady beneath the worst of it so that he sank only so far and no further. That was the strength of it. Not that they could do impossible things together, though they could apparently, they'd just done one. The strength was quieter and larger than that. The strength was that neither of them could be fully emptied anymore, because the well went down through two people, and you cannot drain a well by drawing from only one of its mouths. When Harry was at his end, Hermione was his reserve. When Hermione was at hers, Harry was her floor. The war could exhaust either of them. It could not, so long as they were both alive and the note held, exhaust the thing they were. There was always more in the other than the enemy knew to account for, because the enemy counted them as two, and they were, in the way that mattered, one, and the one had twice the depth and half the ceiling. "You've gone glassy again," Ron called back. "He's thinking about how strong we are," Hermione said dryly, and Harry felt her feel it too. The same understanding, arriving in her the same moment, the way it did. "And," Ron said. Hermione was quiet for a few steps. Then she said the thing that Harry would remember later, in the dark, when the force that wanted to sever them finally came. She said it lightly, but he felt her mean it all the way down, and the strong part isn't the part I'd protect. If someone wanted to hurt us, really hurt us, they wouldn't go after the strength. The strength takes care of itself. They'd go after the seam. They'd try to make us one thing or two separate things. Either one, anything but what we are, which is a whole that's still two. She looked at the darkening sky. The woman in the stone knew. "Guard the seam," she said. "Everyone thinks the danger is being pulled apart, but being pushed together is a way to lose each other too. You can drown two people in one soul as easily as you can starve two lamps in two rooms. And the terrible thing, Harry, the thing I can't stop turning over, is that being pushed together doesn't feel like danger. It feels like coming home. That's what'll make it work if anyone ever tries it. It won't feel like an attack. It'll feel like finally getting to rest." "You've gone quiet again yourself now," Harry said. "That's usually you working up to telling me something I won't like." "I'm working up to telling you I'm frightened," Hermione said, "and that I don't have a plan for it, which you know is the thing I hate most in the world, being frightened of a thing I can't outline." She kept her eyes on the darkening lane. "Everything else we've faced, I could read about. There were books. There was somebody, somewhere, who'd written down what to do. But guarding the seam isn't in any book, Harry. The woman in the stone couldn't even tell us how, she could only tell us that. And I keep reaching for the notebook and the notebook's empty on this page, and it terrifies me. Because the one time in my life the answer isn't something I can look up, is the one time it matters more than anything ever has." "Then it's a good job you're not doing it alone," Harry said, and he felt her take that in, felt it land against the specific old loneliness of the girl who had always had to know everything herself because there was never anyone to know it with her. "You don't have to have the answer, Hermione. That was always the deal, even before we knew about the soul. You be the one who reads the books. I'll be the one who reads the books. I'll be the one who walks into the dark when the books run out. Between us, we've never once needed a page that told us what to do, because you knew where the wall was and I wasn't afraid to touch it. That hasn't changed. We're just doing it for keeps now." She looked at him then and did not say anything, because he had reached into the oldest fear she had and set something warm against it. And there were no words in any book for that either. The safe house came into view, its windows lit, Mrs. Weasley's silhouette moving behind the curtains. Somewhere, a fox barked. And Harry walked toward the light beside the far half of himself, carrying a thing he hadn't told her and a strength he was only beginning to measure. And he thought about the seam, the tender remade hairline where he ended and she began. And he made himself a promise he did not say aloud, because she'd have felt it if he'd said it aloud, and he wanted, for once, to give her something she couldn't feel coming, that whatever came, whatever tried them, he would guard the seam. He would stay too. He would keep being one small, heavy, specific Harry beside her, and never again let the beautiful ease of the one person swallow the harder, truer, twofold thing they were. He would learn before the winter was out exactly how hard a promise it was to keep. But that was ahead of them, in the dark, still gathering. Tonight there was only the lit window, and the note held warm and whole and two, and the strength of it walked them home. They did not tell the others about the near loss of the seam. But at midnight, when the house had gone down to its embers and its snores, they took the gray stone up to the attic room the two of them had claimed, and they sat on the floor with a single candle between them, and they did the last thing the stone had left to give. The decades had come out in the chapel as a warning. Do not do this. Guard the seam. But a warning is only the shape of a life, not the life itself. And Hermione had felt, in the moment of receiving it, that the stone held more, not just the woman's conclusion, but her memory. The actual 11 winters she had lived alone after her other half went out, and Hermione wanted them. Of course she did. She wanted to know how a shared soul survived being half of itself, because she was building, without saying so, a defense against a day she was afraid was coming, and Harry felt her want it and did not stop her, because he wanted it too, and because he had learned that the only thing worse than knowing a terrible thing was Hermione facing it without him. There was no pensive. There didn't need to be. The stone was a pensive of a kind older than the silver basins the ministry kept. It was a memory that had learned to be a place, and when the two of them touched it together, seam held carefully open this time. Deliberately too, they did not dissolve into the reaching that had opened it. They stepped, instead, into the woman's long alone. It was Baroque, that country. It was the ancient magic in its native tongue, and it did not speak the plain language of the ministry's taxonomies. They walked, in the memory, through a life lived when magic was still said aloud in the old way, and a shared soul was not an impossibility, but a rare grace, feared and honored. The two lamps carried through the village at festivals to bless the fires. They felt the woman's other half, a man whose name the memory kept private even from them, held it close as a coal against the cold, and they felt what it had been to be old together. Two lamps burned low and steady, the note between them worn smooth as a river stone with 60 years of use. No longer the astonishment it had been to Harry and Hermione, but something better, something Harry had no word for and Hermione, for once, did not reach for one. Because the memory gave it to them without a word, the ordinariness of it. The old couple had stopped noticing they were one soul the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. It had become the floor they stood on. And that, Harry understood, was the thing to want. Not the astonishment of the kitchen, not the terror of the road, not the lethal chord of the lane, but this. The far country of 60 years on, where being one soul in two bodies was simply the weather you had always lived in, unremarkable and total, and then the fever, and the going out. The memory did not spare them. They felt the man go, not sundered by distance, not cut by any blade, just an old body failing in an ordinary winter while the other half lay beside him in the same bed. Close enough that no distance strained the note, and it had not mattered. Closeness had not saved him, because you cannot lend your other half your life, only your strength, and strength is not the same as life. And Harry felt the woman feel the note change, not fray the way distance frayed it, but thin from the far end, as one lamp guttered, and he felt the terrible mercy of it, that she had been right there holding him when the note went from one in two places to one in one place, and had felt the exact moment the second lamp went dark, and had not looked away. The 11 winters after were the hardest thing Harry had ever walked through, and he walked through them holding Hermione's hand, physically in the attic, and holding her too, across the seam, the two of them wrapped around each other in the memory of another woman's grief, because the woman had not died with him. That was the thing the stories got wrong, the thing she had poured into the stone to correct. A shared soul, half gone, does not always follow. Sometimes it stays. Sometimes it lives 11 more winters, one lamp burning where two had burnt, and learns the thing she wanted them to know, that she was not half a soul. She had never been half a soul. That was the lie the word shared told, the lie of arithmetic. One soul split in two, making two halves. It had never been halves. She had been a whole soul that happened for 60 years to be sung in two voices, and when one voice fell silent, the song did not become half a song. It became a song sung in one voice, quieter, lonelier, but whole, still whole, because a soul is not a quantity you can have, it is a flame, and a flame in one lamp is no less a flame than a flame in two. She grieved, and it did not kill her because there was nothing in her that required him to keep existing. She had loved him with her whole soul, and her whole soul remained. That was the last gift of the stone, and Harry felt it land in Hermione like light into a dark room, because it was the answer to the thing she had been most afraid of and never said, that if she lost him, she would be a broken half-thing, dependent, ruined, unable to go on. She would not be. The woman in the stone had proven it with 11 winters. You could lose your other voice and remain a whole song. They came out of the memory near dawn, stiff and wept out, the candle guttering, and it was there in the gray attic that Harry finally told her how close it had been, how the one person had not wanted to be two again, how she'd had to make a seam out of a manufactured disagreement to hand him back his edges, how he'd wanted, God help him, to stay dissolved then never come back. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I know. I felt you not want to come back, Harry. I've known since the chapel. I didn't say anything because you weren't ready, and because... She looked at the dying candle. Because I wanted to stay too. That's the part I've been carrying. It wasn't only you. When I made the disagreement, when I did the thing that pulled us apart, I did it against my own wanting. Half of me was screaming to let it dissolve, to be the one person, to never have to be small and separate and misunderstood again. I made the seam anyway, and it was the hardest magic I've ever done, and it wasn't a spell, it was just choosing to disagree with the person I love most on purpose, so we wouldn't drown. She turned to him, and the candlelight moved on her face. That's what she was trying to tell us. The whole memory, the 11 winters, all of it. She wasn't warning us about death. She was warning us about the opposite of death. She was warning us that the sweetest thing in the world is going to be to stop being two, and that we have to refuse it, over and over, for the whole rest of our lives, because the two of us is the treasure, and the one of us is only the strength that lets us afford it. The candle went out. Gray dawn came into the attic's one small window, and below them the house began, faintly, to wake. Someone filling a kettle, a door. Harry found her hand in the near dark, held the seam wide open. deliberately, so he could feel every distinct edge of her, every place where she was not him and never would be, every disagreement waiting to happen, every difference he'd spend his life bumping into, and loved all of it. The whole heavy twofold weight of it, more than he'd loved the terrible ease of the one person. "Then we stay too," he said. "However much it costs, whatever comes." "Whatever comes," she agreed. And neither of them said the other thing, the thing the memory had left ringing under everything, that a soul which most fears being pushed into one, and most fears being torn into two, is a soul with two doors an enemy could try, and that somewhere out in the gathering winter there was a man who had spent his whole life learning how souls come apart, and that he would, if he ever learned what they were, understand the two doors better than they did themselves. Chapters 3D. Chapter 4. The man who counted in pieces. Lord Voldemort had spent his life proving that a soul was a thing you could divide, and he did not like being told he was wrong. The Snatcher who told him did not mean to. He was a small man named Scabior's cousin, of no importance, who had been dropped in a lane in Devon by two children and a red-headed boy and had woken in a ministry cell that was no longer, strictly, the ministry's. He had a memory he thought was worthless and would have traded for a hot meal, the memory of a fight that had gone wrong. And when the pale man in the black robes reached into his head with a hand that felt like cold water pouring into every locked room of him, the Snatcher gave up the memory gladly, because it was the least of what he had, and he wanted the cold water to stop. Voldemort watched the memory the way a jeweler watches light move in a flawed stone. Two children fighting back to back in a Devon lane. Nothing in that. He had seen children fighting back. He had made most of them stop. But there was something wrong with how these two moved, and it took him 3 viewings to name it, and when he named it the cell went very cold, colder than his temper usually made a room, because for the first time in a great many years, Lord Voldemort had been surprised, and he did not enjoy surprises, having built his existence specifically to abolish them. They moved like one thing. Not like partners, not like a drilled aura pair of which he had killed several and could recognize the seams in. These two had no scenes. The girl guarded Potter's back without looking. Potter shielded the girl's blind side a half-second before the curse that threatened it was cast. There was no coordination in it because coordination is what two things do, and this was what one thing does, one body dividing labor between its own two hands. Voldemort had watched the memory a 4th time and a 5th, and the cold in the cell had deepened. Because he understood souls better than any wizard living or dead, he had made himself the world's foremost authority on the subject through the simple expedient of dismantling his own, and he knew what he was looking at. He was looking at a soul in 2 bodies, whole. The Snatcher, forgotten, began to weep from the residual cold, and Voldemort silenced him with a flick that was barely a thought because he needed to think, and the small man's noise was an obstacle to thinking. A soul in 2 bodies, whole. He turned the fact over. He examined it from every side, the way he had once, as a clever, hungry orphan, examined every fact that came to him, looking for the use in it, the leverage. The door had opened, and what he found, turning it, was not leverage. What he found first before anything so useful as a plan was an old feeling he had believed himself long past, and the feeling was affront, because he had been told once that this was impossible, not by a book. By his own reasoning, at 16, in a library much like the one the Potter boy had apparently been reading in, he had reasoned it out. A soul was a unity, and to escape death you had to break the unity, and breaking it was violence, and the violence had a price, and he had decided, with the magnificent cold courage he was still proud of, to pay the price. 7 times he had paid it. 7 times he had committed the act that tore a piece away and lodged it in a vessel, and each time he had felt himself become less a person and more a distribution. A thing spread thin across England like butter over too much bread, and he had told himself it was worth it, that this was the only road to the only prize, that a soul that survived in more than one place was the highest magic and it could be achieved by one method and one method only, which was the method he had the courage to use and lesser men did not, and here were 2 children who had achieved it by accident, by the other road. The road he had told himself did not exist, a soul surviving in more than one place, not through tearing but through some obscenity of wholeness he could not even feel the shape of, because his own soul had been in pieces so long that it could no more perceive a whole soul than a man born blind could perceive red. He could see the effect of it in the memory, the seamless two-handed fighting, the way a blind man can feel the heat of a red-hot iron. He could not see the thing itself, and that, more than any strategic consideration, was what made him decide, sitting in the cold cell over the weeping Snatcher, that the thing had to be ended, not studied. He told himself for an hour that he would study it, that here was the last secret of the magic he had built his deathlessness upon, that a whole soul in 2 vessels might teach him to repair the thinning he had begun, in the small hours, to feel. He told himself this and did not believe it, because underneath the telling was the affront, and the affront wanted only one thing, which was for the proof of his mistake to stop existing. If a soul could survive in 2 bodies without being torn, then he had torn himself 7 times for nothing. He had made himself a horror for nothing. There had been another road, an easier road, a road paved with the very thing he had spent his life despising as weakness, and 2 children had walked it without even trying. And every day they went on breathing was a day the universe spent whispering to Lord Voldemort that he had been, at 16, in the one decision that mattered, catastrophically wrong. He could not have that. He was many things and had made himself most of them on purpose, but he could not survive being wrong about the shape of the soul. It was the one thing he had staked everything on, so the whole soul would be unmade. And because he was still, under everything, the cleverest man in any room he entered, he would unmake it in the way that answered the affront most exactly. He would take the thing these children had built out of wholeness, and he would break it. And in the breaking he would prove, to the universe and to the small cold voice that had begun to trouble his sleep, that in the end there was only one truth about souls, and it was his truth. And the truth was that anything whole came, everything can be erf. He knew how to cut souls. It was the only thing he had ever truly studied, and a whole soul in 2 bodies, he saw at once, offered him a convenience the tearing of his own had never allowed. It had a seam, a place where the one became 2. He had felt for that seam in himself at 16 and found nothing, because a single soul in a single body has no seam, and so he had had to tear where there was no natural line, which was why it had hurt, which was why it had cost. But these two had a fold already built into them, a hairline where Potter ended and the girl began. He would not have to tear them where there was no line. He would only have to find the line they already had and set his blade in it and press. Voldemort rose. The Snatcher, sensing the change in the room, tried to make himself smaller against the cold stone. Beyond the cell, his people waited, and among them, one who could tell him where the Order kept its safe houses in Devon, or could be made to, and the girl was the key. He had seen that in the memory too. The girl was the one who understood what they were. The girl kept a black book, and Potter followed where the girl reasoned. Take the girl. Take her far, because he had read the old accounts too in his youth, the sundered lamps, the losing of the left side, and he knew that distance alone would begin the work for him, would soften the whole soul, would start it letting go of its far ends before he ever raised the blade. Take the girl, carry her to the far end of the country, and let the miles do the coarse work while he prepared the fine. He would sever them. And Harry Potter, who could not be killed while some part of the prophecy still tangled them together, would be made to watch his own soul cut in half by a man who knew exactly where the seam was, and would learn, in his last useful hours, the only lesson Lord Voldemort had ever really had to teach, that love builds nothing that hatred cannot take apart, given a sharp enough edge and a steady enough hand. He was wrong about that as it happened. But he had been wrong about souls only once before, and had built a lifelong fortress against ever admitting it, and the fortress held, and he walked out of the cell entirely certain, which was the state in which Lord Voldemort had always done his worst work. Harry knew something was wrong before the window broke. He was in the attic room at the safe house with the black notebook open on his knee, waiting for Hermione to come back from the garden where she'd gone to think, because she thought better outdoors, and he learned to let her, keeping only the threat of her in his chest as company, and the threat of her, which had been calm. A low, warm hum of a girl frowning at a hedge and working something out, changed. It changed the way a note changes when a hand closes over the string, first to sharpness, her alarm, bright and specific. Then a smear of green light he saw with eyes that were not his. Then figures coming over the garden wall. Too many, too fast, and Hermione's wand up in her voice. He felt her voice more than heard it, shouting the warning that had no time to reach the house by any ordinary means, and reached it anyway, through him, so that Harry was on his feet and down 2 flights of stairs shouting before the first spell hit the kitchen. They had come for her. He understood it in the garden, arriving too late, in the wreck of Mrs. Weasley's beds, with Ron already firing over his shoulder and Bill's shield ringing overhead. They had come for her specifically, 6 of them, and they had not tried for Harry at all, which was so wrong. So against everything the war had taught him about who the enemy wanted, that for a moment he could not make sense of the shape of the attack. They wanted Hermione. They peeled away from Harry when he came at them. One of them, a woman with a flat, clever face, actually shielded Harry aside rather than curse him, batted his stunner away and turned from him to close on Hermione, and that was the moment Harry understood, with a horror that started at the soles of his feet, that the enemy knew. Somehow the enemy knew what they were and had reasoned correctly that you did not need to catch Harry Potter if you had the other half of his soul, because he would follow it into any trap that had ever been set. They took her by the oldest trick there was, which was numbers. Bill went down under a body bind. Ron took a curse across the ribs that folded him. And Harry, fighting toward her through 6 of them with everything he had, felt the flat-faced woman get a hand on Hermione's arm, and felt Hermione's terror, and felt across the note the exact instant the woman turned on the spot, to dissupport it turned on the spot. Because Hermione, in that instant, did the only thing left to her, which was not to fight the woman's grip, but to reach for Harry, all of her, a great desperate fleeing and defeating pendant to name tone hold a ton, and then she was gone. And the crack of the disapparation was the loudest thing Harry had ever heard, because it was not only air rushing in to fill the space where a girl had been, it was the note, stretching, In an instant, from 10 feet to however many hundreds of miles the woman had carried her, the note went from warm and whole to a single high line drawn out and out past every reading in Hermione's black book, past 170 feet, past a mile past the far edge they had been too wise to find, and Harry Potter, standing in the ruin of the garden with the enemy already gone, felt at last in his own body what it was to be sundered. It did not hurt at first. That was the terrible part, the part the stone had told them and he had not understood until now. It did not hurt. It went numb. He felt his left side begin to go. The side that had always pointed at her. The side that had shielded her blind flank in the lane without looking, and it did not hurt. It simply began, quietly, to stop being his. His left hand, when he looked at it, seemed to belong to someone standing behind him. His left leg took his weight but did not report back that it had. The old account swam up in him. The brother 3 days' ride from the sea, losing the use of the side toward her, lying at last as a lamp, with the oil run out, breathing warm and empty, his eyes open upon nothing, and Harry understood that he was watching it begin in himself, and that he had at most hours, maybe less, before the numbness climbed from his left side into the middle of him. And Harry understood that he was watching it, but kind that Harry. Ron had dragged himself up against the garden wall, one arm clamped over his ribs, his face gray. Harry, they took her. We have to. I know where she is, Harry said. Ron stared at him. Not the place, the direction. Harry turned, slowly, feeling the numb left side of himself like a compass turned the wrong way, and he found it. The way the brother in the stone had found it across a whole sea. His left side was going dark, and the darkness had a gradient, and the gradient pointed, and where it pointed was her, north and west. The far corner of the country, or near it. He could feel her out there at the end of the drawn-out note, a call almost too distant to sense, and he could feel that she was afraid and that she was, even now, even sundering, doing the thing she did, which was to hold on, to keep the note from fraying faster than it had to spend her whole formidable will on not letting go of her far ends, buying them both time with the only currency she had left. She was buying time. That meant there was something to buy it for. That meant they had not simply taken her to kill her. If they had wanted her dead, she would be dead. They had taken her far on purpose, to sunder them with distance, which meant distance was part of a plan, which meant there was a plan, which meant there was a place where the plan would happen. And Harry was going to be at that place before it did. Bill, he said. Bill was sitting up now, freed of the body bond by Mrs. Weasley, who had come running with her wand out and murder in her face. Bill, I need to apparate and I can hold a destination. I've never been where she is. I can only feel the direction. Can you sight along in a direction instead of a place? Can it be done? It can't. Bill's face was cut and bleeding. You'll splinch us across half of Wales. Apparition needs a place, Harry, a real fixed point. You have to know where you're. I know where she is. Harry heard his own voice from a distance because the left side of his head had begun, faintly, to numb too, and it made his own words sound like they came from the next room. I don't know the name of it. I don't know what it looks like. But I know where she is more exactly than I have ever known where anything is in my life, because she is me. She is the other half of me, and I have never once been unable to find my own hand in the dark. Give me the direction and I'll be the fixed point. She's the fixed point. Just get me pointed and let me fall toward her. Bill looked at Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley looked at Harry's left hand, which had begun, very slightly, to hang wrong, and it was Mrs. Weasley, who had buried a brother in the last war and would sooner have died than bury a child in this one, who said, "Do it. Side along him on the direction, Bill, and if he splinches, take him to the far corner of the country and let him crawl the rest of the way on the compass gods put in him, because I have seen that look on a man's face exactly once before, and it was your father's, and there is no plan on this earth that will keep Harry Potter from that girl, so we had better make his going survivable than waste breath." Forbidding it, Ron caught Harry's arm as he turned to go. He was gray with the pain of the curse across his ribs. One arm clamped over them, and Harry could see it cost him even to stand, and he knew, with a cold lurch, what Ron was about to ask. "I'm coming," Ron said. "You can't." Harry made himself say it plainly, because Ron deserved plainness and not comfort. "You can barely stand. You'd splinch on the first jump the state you're in, and then Bill has to choose between you and me halfway across Wales, and he'll choose you, because you're his brother, and I'll be gone on the next jump, and he'll never catch me, and you'll have killed us both by coming. So you can't, and I need you here more than I need you there anyway." "For what?" Ron said bitterly. "To sit in a wrecked garden while the two of you, to hold the house." Harry gripped his friend's shoulder, hard, the good one. "If this is a trap, and it is, then it's a trap that pulled us both out into it, and the only people left standing between the enemy and everyone we love are the ones in this garden, and the one I trust to keep his head when the second wave comes is you. It's always been you, Ron. When it goes wrong and everyone's panicking, you're the one who puts the kettle on. So put the kettle on. Hold the house. Be here when I bring her back, because I'm going to bring her back, and when I do, she's going to need to see your stupid face telling her she took her time." His voice cracked, and he did not let it stop him. I can't do the thing I'm about to do if I'm also afraid for you. Let me not be afraid for you. That's what I need. That's the whole job." Ron looked at him for a long moment, his jaw working, every part of him wanting to argue, and then he let go of Harry's arm and he stepped back, and he said roughly, "Bring her back or don't come back at all, because I'm not carrying the both of us through what happens to this family if you lose her." And Harry, he stopped. "Your hand. Your left one. It's going, isn't it? I can see it going." "Yeah." "Then stop wasting my time saying goodbye and go get the rest of yourself," Ron said. Before, there's not enough of you left to make the trip, and it was the truest and kindest thing anyone had said to Harry all night, because it refused to treat the going as anything but survivable, refused the funeral tone, handed Harry back the version of himself that acted instead of grieved, and Harry took it, and turned, and gripped Bill's arm, and let the world fold. The numbness was in his forearm now, climbing. He marked it the way Hermione would have, coldly, so it would not own him, wrist gone, forearm going, and it was moving inward at the pace of a hell breath running out. He did not know how long he had before it reached the middle of him. He knew only that it was a race between the numbness climbing in from his far end and the distance shrinking as he fell toward her, and that he intended to win it, and that losing it did not bear thinking about, so he did not think about it, and fell. Hermione had one advantage over Harry, and she spent it the moment the world stopped spinning. The advantage was that she had read the accounts, and she had written them out in her own hand in the black notebook. And so when the flat-faced woman's apparition dumped her onto cold sand at the edge of a sea she did not recognize, and the sundering hit her the way it was hitting Harry a country away, she knew exactly what it was hitting Harry a country away. She knew exactly what it was. She did not waste the first precious seconds on panic. She had rehearsed this in the library at 2 a.m. without letting herself admit that was what she was doing, rehearsing for the day someone put a distance between her and Harry that neither of them had chosen. She had the map of the disaster already drawn. All she had to do was refuse to be lost on it. The left side of her was going? No, she corrected herself, with the cold precision that was the only prayer she had. The right side. She'd always been the right hand of the pair, the side that guarded Harry's blind flank. Her right was the side that pointed at him, and it was her right side that had begun to go numb, her right hand hanging strange from her bound wrist. Her right foot, a rumor. The account said the soul let go of its far ends first. The parts pointed away from the other, and hers were pointed away now by 100 and more miles, and so her right was guttering, and she made herself feel it happen without flinching, because a scientist observes even her own extinction, especially her own extinction, because the observation might be the thing that saves her. Recoverable, she told herself, in her own upright hand, from the notebook page she could see behind her eyes. It does not tear. It only lets go. And what has let go can be taken up again, if the distance is closed in time. So the question is time. How much time do I have before the numbness climbs from my right side into the middle of me? And the answer, from the account? Days. Over water. For 2 old people who did nothing but lie still and grieve. But I'm not going to lie still. I am going to hold on, and holding on buys time, and I have the strongest will of anyone I have ever met. My mother says so, and my teachers said so, and they all meant it as a complaint, and today it is going to be the thing that keeps my soul from letting go of its far ends before Harry can reach them. So, she held on. It was not a spell. There was no incantation for it, no wand movement, and they had taken her wand, and it would not have helped anyway. It was closer to what you do when you are very cold and you keep moving your fingers so they do not stop being yours. She reached across the drawn-out screaming note for Harry, and she did not let go, and every time she felt her right side try to slip further into the dark, she pulled it back by main force of wanting. Mine. That hand is mine. That foot is mine. I am not letting you have the far ends of me. And it cost her. It cost her enormously. It was like holding a door shut against a rising sea. But she held. And while she watched, she thought. And what she thought was, this is elaborate. That was the thing that gave her hope, oddly bound and sundering on the cold sand, as the woman hauled her upright and marched her toward a gray standing stone. It was elaborate. If they had wanted her dead, she would be dead. A snatcher could have killed her in the garden. If they had wanted to sunder her from Harry and let the distance to it, they had no need to bring her to her prepared place with symbols already carved and waiting in the sand. Someone had built this. Someone had known she was coming, had known what she was, had prepared her right. Which meant, first, that the secret was out, and she felt the cold weight of that. The failure of it, all their careful hiding undone, and it meant, second and more usefully, that they wanted the two of them together at the end. They had taken her far to soften the soul, but they meant to close the distance again, here, with Harry present, because you cannot make a boy watch you cut his soul in half if the other half is at the far end of the country. The distance was a preparation, not a destination. Harry was going to be brought here, or was going to come here, and the whole thing was staged for an audience of one. She was bait. She understood it without any of the flinching. A younger Hermione might have done, because being bait was, at this precise moment, the best available news. Bait is kept alive. Bait is brought close to the thing it is meant to catch. and close to Harry was the one place in all the world she wanted to be, and this right, whatever it was going to bring him to her, which meant she would have him in reach before the end, and Hermione Granger had never once had a person she loved in reach and failed to think of something. They bound her to the stone. The woman with the flat, clever face did it, without cruelty and without gentleness, the way you tie up a parcel and then stepped back, and the symbols in the sand began to glow, green and white, and Hermione felt the first touch of the right on the note and understood, with the part of her that had read too many dark books over the summer, exactly what she was looking at. It was a severing. And it was built, she saw at once, on an assumption, the way all rights are built on assumptions, because a right is only a machine and every machine is built for a particular kind of material. This one was built to cut a soul from its horcrux. She knew that shape. She had studied the theory of horcruxes until she was sick with it. And a horcrux was a torn thing, a fragment held rigid in a vessel, anchored, fixed, and the right was designed to find that rigid anchoring and cut it. It assumed rigidity. It assumed a fixed seam, a hard line between the piece and the whole, the kind of line you get when you tear a soul on purpose and jam the fragment into a locket. But she and Harry did not have a torn seam. They had a living one. A seam that moved, that they had learned to open and close, that ran slack in the fever of union and drew tight and tender in the quiet of two people disagreeing about the toast. Their seam was not an anchor, it was a hinge. And Hermione, bound to the stone with the right beginning to glow, felt the whole terrifying architecture of the enemy's mistake open in front of her like the answer to a problem she had been half-solving all summer without knowing the question. He is going to try to cut a hinge as though it were an anchor. He is going to set his blade in our fold and press, and the right is going to look for something rigid to cut against. And if we give it something rigid, it will cut. If we hold our seam hard and fixed the way a torn soul holds its fragment, the right will find exactly the line it was built for, and it will work, and he will cut us in half. But if we don't, if, at the moment he presses, we refuse to be rigid, if we make our seam do the thing it does, open and close, B2 and B1, move, then the right will reach into the fold looking for an anchor and find a hinge. Find something alive and shifting that will not hold still to be cut, and a blade that presses against a thing that will not hold still does not sever it. It slides off. It cannot find purchase. You cannot cut water because water will not hold the shape of the wound. She had it. Bound to a stone at the edge of the sea, sundering, her right side going dark, in the last hour before the worst man in the world tried to cut her soul in half, Hermione Granger worked out how to survive it, and the working out steadied her more than any comfort could have, because knowing where the edge was had always been the only prayer she knew, and now she knew, and the knowing was a floor she could stand on. The only problem was Harry. He would come whole. She knew him. He would come down the headland as one furious, devoted boy with his wand out, ready to fight the man who had taken her, and the right would catch him whole and rigid with love and rage and cut him, because a soul braced hard against an enemy is exactly the rigid line the blade was built for. She had to reach him before that. She had to make him understand, in the half-second before he reached her, that the way to save them was not to fight harder or love harder or hold on tighter. It was to let go of holding it all. To be, at the moment of the blade, not a wall but a hinge. To trust her enough to do the one thing every instinct in his brave, devoted body would scream against, which was to stop bracing and open and move. She lifted her head against the cold rock and turned it up the dark slope toward where she could feel him coming. Closer every minute, the note shortening, her right side tingling back to life, mile by mile, as he closed the awful distance. And she gathered everything she had left after the long holding on and made ready to throw it up the hill the instant he was near enough to catch it. "Don't come down here whole," she would tell him. "Come down here being us." And she waited for her other half to arrive, and she was afraid, and she was ready, and she was, even now, even here, entirely herself. They did not splinch quite. It took 3 jumps, each one a lurch across dark country, Bill gripping Harry's arm and Harry gripping the failing compass of his own left side, correcting between each jump, north, more west, closer, the coal of her growing from an ember to a low fire as the miles fell away and the note began, blessedly, agonizingly, to shorten. Every mile they closed, a little of Harry's left side came back to him, tingling, furious, the way a foot comes back after you have sat on it too long, and he welcomed the pain, because pain meant the numbness was retreating, meant the light was climbing back into the too far end of him. The second jump nearly lost him. They came down in a black field somewhere in the middle of the country, at the furthest point of the arc, the point where they were briefly no closer to Hermione than they had been a grim old place, and for a few seconds in that field the compass swung wild, because Harry could not tell, in the disorientation of apparition, whether the fire of her was ahead or behind, and the numbness took the moment of confusion and surged, climbing past his elbow, reaching for his shoulder, and Harry felt the terrible seduction the account had warned, had the pult. "Which way?" Bill was saying, gripping both his shoulders, shaking him. "Harry, you're the compass, I'm just the legs, you have to point. Which way is she?" And Harry, with the numbness at his shoulder and the field spinning, did the thing Hermione would have done, the thing she had taught him without either of them knowing it was a lesson. He stopped fighting the numbness and used it. He stopped trying to feel where the fire was, and felt instead where the cold was going. where the dark was climbing, because the numbness itself was a compass. The numbness was his soul letting go of the end pointed away from her, which meant the numbness pointed away from her, which meant she was in the exact opposite direction from the cold. "There," Harry said, and flung out his failing left arm, the numb one, the one that had gone dark first because it pointed at her, and it pointed now, unerring, at a black horizon that looked like every other black horizon and was the only one that mattered. "She's there. Follow my dead hand, Bill. It knows the way even when the rest of me doesn't." Bill looked at that numb, outflung arm for half a second, and then he trusted it, because there was nothing else to trust, and he turned them on the spot, and they fell toward the dark the dead hand pointed at, and on the far side of the fall the fire of her was suddenly, blessedly nearer, and the numbness stopped climbing and began, grudgingly, to retreat back down toward the wrist, and Harry could have wept with the return of his own shoulder. They came down at last on a headland at the edge of the sea. Harry knew it was the place before he saw anything on it, because the note was short again, short enough that she was close, a mile perhaps, no more, and the relief of that was so great he nearly went to his knees. But it was not warm, that was wrong. At a mile the node should have been recovering toward warmth, and instead it was taut and bright and wrong, and under it he could feel something he had never felt before, a pressure, a cold intent laid along the note like a hand laid flat along a harp string to feel where it should be cut. "He's here," Harry said. "Bill, he's here himself. I can feel him touching it." Because that was the other thing the numbness retreating had let him feel, that they had stopped taking Hermione away. They had brought her to a place and stopped, on this sea headland in the last of the light, and something had begun. Down the slope of the headland, where the land ran out into cliff and the cliff ran down into a cove, there was a light that was not the sea's light, a low green-white glow that pulsed at a rhythm. Harry felt in his teeth, and around it, small at this distance, figures, and at the center of them two things that mattered more to Harry than his own life, a girl bound upright to a standing stone, and a tall, pale, moving Erin, reither-headed Wettericor. Voldemort had not waited to be found. He had wanted to be found. Of course he had. Harry understood it all at once, the whole cold architecture of it. The enemy had not taken Hermione to hide her, but to hang her out like bait on the end of a drawn-out note. Knowing Harry would feel exactly where she was, knowing he would come, because that was the point. Voldemort did not want to sever the soul while Harry slept safe in Devon. He wanted Harry here. He wanted Harry close enough to feel every stroke of the blade. The whole thing was a lesson, and the lesson required a pupil, and the pupil had just arrived, exactly on schedule, dragged the length of the country by the very bond that was about to be cut in front of him. Harry. Bill had his wand out, and his curse-breaker's eyes on the green-white glow, and his voice had gone quiet and professional in the way that meant he was frightened past shouting. "That's a severing rite. I've seen the shape of one once, in Egypt, an old one, older than the pyramid it was under. It's meant to cut a soul from its anchor, but it's... Harry, that ritual's meant for a soul and its horcrux, for cutting a torn piece loose from the main. It shouldn't work on you two at all. You're not torn. There's no piece to cut, unless he's found the seam," Harry said. And he began to walk down the headland toward the green-white light, and Bill came with him because Bill was a Weasley and they did not let a boy walk down a cliff alone toward the worst man in the world. Down at the standing stone, in the pulsing light, Hermione lifted her head. She could not have seen him yet. The dark was near total, and the glow would have blinded her to anything beyond it. But she lifted her head and turned it, unerring, up the slope to the exact spot where Harry was. Because she did not need to see him, she had never needed to see him. And across the shortened note, Harry felt her find him, felt the flood of her relief and her terror and her love. And under all of it, sharp and clear and entirely Hermione, even bound to a stone at the edge of the sea with a soul cutter walking circles around her, felt her think one furious, lucid, unromantic thought, meant for him, meant to save him, flung up the slope with the last of her frido. "Don't come down here whole." He set the right to catch a seam held rigid. "Whatever you do, don't come down here being only Harry. He'll cut you. Come down here being us." And below her, at the center of the light, Lord Voldemort raised a hand that had cut a soul 7 times before, and set the flat of his cold intent against the taut bright string that ran between the two children he had decided must not be allowed to prove him wrong, and began, with the confidence of a man who had never once in his long, deathless life met a thing he could not take apart, to press. The pressing was not a spell Harry could see. It was a sensation, and it arrived in the note the way a boot arrives on ice, a first wait, testing, and then a spreading complaint from the whole surface, a fine white singing of strain. Harry stopped walking. He had to. His legs did not entirely belong to him now, not from the sundering, which the closing distance had eased, but from the new thing, the pressure Voldemort was laying along the seam. And it was worse than distance because distance had only stretched them, and this was looking for the fold. "Come down, Harry," said a high, cold voice, and it carried up the headland without being raised, carried on the green-white light, intimate as a voice at his ear. "You have come so far. Do not stop now, at the interesting part." Harry came down. He came down the last of the slope into the cove with Bill a pace behind, and to his left, into a ring of Death Eaters who did not move to stop him because they had been told not to, because he was the pupil and the pupil was meant to have a good view. And he came to a stop perhaps 30 feet from the standing stone, and he made himself look at all of it at once, the way you make yourself look at a wound to know its size. Hermione bound upright to the gray stone, unhurt, her chin up, her eyes fixed on him and blazing. The pulsing right carved in light on the sand around the stone's base, old symbols that hurt to look at directly. And between Harry and the stone, unhurried, almost gentle, Lord Voldemort, turning to face him with the ruined face and red eyes and an expression Harry had never seen him wear before, was wide up all. In an Orantanton, there, Voldemort said softly, now we are all present. The one who cannot die while the prophecy holds. The girl who is the other half of him, which the prophecy never anticipated, being written by a fraud in a pub, and I, who am going to teach the both of you the one thing that is true about the soul, which all your reading has failed to find, though you had it under your hands the whole time. He tilted his head. Do you know what it is, Harry? The one true thing? I will tell you, because I am not, whatever they say of me, without generosity toward the young. The one true thing about the soul is that it comes apart. Everything else is sentiment. You have built a great deal of feeling on top of a bond you do not understand, and I am going to show you the bare bond underneath the feeling, and it is going to come apart in my hand like everything else, and you are going to watch, and at the end, you will know what I have known since I was younger than you, that there is nothing whole in all the world that a sufficient will cannot divide. You're wrong, Harry said. His voice came out steadier than he felt, because Hermione was feeding it to him across the note even now, even bound, even with the right biting into her. She was pouring steadiness into him the way she always had, and he took it and stood in it. You've been wrong for 50 years and you've built a lot of feeling on top of it. Sentiment, you called it. You're the most sentimental man I've ever met. You tore your soul into 7 pieces because you couldn't stand one true thing, which is that everything ends, and you've spent your whole life since then telling yourself it was courage instead of the biggest tantrum in the history of magic. Something moved in the red eyes. Behind Harry, one of the Death Eaters made a small sound and went silent. You want to cut us in half, Harry went on. Not because it's useful. You keep saying it's a lesson, but there's no one here you need to teach. You want to cut us in half because we did the thing you tore yourself apart to do, and we did it without tearing anything. And that means you didn't have to. That's the whole of it, isn't it? Somewhere in that head that's been in 7 places at once, there's a boy of 16 who's just found out he could have had everything he wanted without becoming a monster to get it, and he can't bear it, so he'd rather cut up the proof than live one more day knowing he broke himself for nothing. The high voice did not answer at once, and in the silence Harry felt, across the note, Hermione's fierce flare of yes, that's it, that's exactly it, keep him talking, keep his will on you and not on the seam, because every second Voldemort spent listening was a second his attention wavered from the pressing, and the pressing eased minutely when the man was affronted. Because affront is a distraction even in the most disciplined mind, and Hermione had understood that before Harry had, and was steering the whole confrontation from her stone by feeding Harry the words most likely to make the moment, for a moment of forada. Clever. Voldemort said at last, and the curiosity had gone cold. The girl's cleverness, wearing her mouth. She thinks I do not feel her doing it. She thinks that because I speak, I do not also work. He lifted his hand again, and the pressing came back, redoubled, and Harry staggered, and up at the stone Hermione's head went back against the rock, and for the first time she made a sound, a short cut-off gasp, quickly swallowed, and Harry's whole body turned toward it before his mind could catch him. Yes, Voldemort breathed. There. You see how it is with you, Harry. She hurts, and you turn. That is the seam, that is the very fold I have been feeling for, and you have just shown it to me, brighter than any right could map it, the place where her pain becomes your motion. I have found it, I have my blade in it. And now, Bill, Harry said. Now. Bill Weasley had not come down the headland to watch, he had come down as a cursebreaker. And while Voldemort's whole vast attention had been bent on the 2 children and the seam between them, Bill had been reading the rite carved in light on the sand. Reading it the way he read the traps of dead pharaohs, and he had found, in the last 30 seconds, the thing he had been looking for, which was the flaw that every old rite carries, the assumption it is built upon. He shouted a word, Harry did not know, in a language older than English, and drove his wand down toward a single glowing symbol at the edge of the ring, and the whole rite flickered. It did not break. Voldemort was too strong and the rite too deep for a single cursebreaker to break. But it flickered, and the pressing on the seam stuttered. And in that stutter, 3 things happened very fast. Voldemort turned on Bill with a snarl and a lash of green light, and Bill went down, and Harry felt with a lurch that he did not know how badly. The Death Eaters, released from their orders by their master's distraction, came off the walls of the cove at Harry all at once, and Hermione, at the stone, with the rite flickering and Voldemort's attention finally, for one whole second, elsewhere, wrenched one hand free of the loosened binding and did not reach for her wand, which she did not have, and did not try to run, which she could not do, but reached instead across the note. For Harry, all of her, flinging the seam wide, and screamed the things she had thrown up the slope before. Only now with everything she had thrown up the slope before. Only now with everything she had. Not whole. Don't fight him whole. He's got the blade in the fold. If you come at him as one thing, he'll cut you. You have to be. Harry, we have to be both. We have to be two and one at the same time. We have to be the thing he can't imagine. Do it with me. Now. And Harry in the center of the closing ring, with curses coming at him from 6 directions, and Bill down and the right flickering and the notes screaming and the world's cold will buried in the fold of his soul, did the only thing left to do, which was to stop trying to understand it and trust her. The way he had trusted her in the kitchen on the first night, the way he had trusted her over the stone, the way he had trusted her over the stone, the way he had trusted her every time it mattered for 7 years, and he flung his own seam wide to meet hers, and which would... What happened next would take the rest of the night and the rest of Harry's life to understand. But this was the beginning of it, the last clear thing before the world became light and terror and choice. The right bit down, and the blade found the fold, and Voldemort pressed with 50 years of certainty behind his hand. And the seam between Harry and Hermione, the tender remade hairline that they had sworn on a chapel floor to guard, began, with a sound like the whole sea drawing back from a shore, to give. Chapter 4, End. Chapter 5, To Stay Two on Purpose. There was a moment, at the very bottom of it, where Harry could have had anything he wanted, and what he wanted was to stop. The right had found the fold. Voldemort's will was pressing into the seam with 50 years of certainty behind it, and the seam was giving, and giving meant that Harry could feel himself and Hermione beginning to come apart along the one line that had ever joined them, and it was the worst sensation he had ever known. Worse than the sundering distance, worse than the graveyard, worse than anything, because it was not happening to his body. It was happening to the place his body was hung from, and in the middle of that unmaking, a mercy opened that was not a mercy. He could stop it. All he had to do was choose one of the two easy things. He could brace, every instinct screamed it, harden, resist, become one rigid, furious wall of Harry and Hermione against the man who would cut them, meet the blade with a stronger edge. It was the brave thing. It was the thing he had done his whole life. The thing that had kept him alive through 6 years of a war, and his whole body wanted it. Wanted to plant his feet in his own soul and dare the cutting to come. Or he could dissolve. He could do the thing the chapel had tempted him with. The thing that had felt like coming home, let the seam go entirely, pour himself completely into Hermione, become the one person, the simple, strong, serene thing that did not have to feel the blade, because it did not have a fold for the blade to find. He could stop being Harry. There would be no pain in it. There would be, he knew from the chapel, a great and terrible peace. Both would kill them. That was the thing Hermione had thrown up the hill, and he was only now at the bottom of it, understanding all the way down. If he braced, the right would find the rigid seam it was built to cut it, and they would come apart, and one of them would be a locket the other had loved. And if he dissolved, there would be no seam to cut, but there would be no them either, just a single drowned soul and 2 bodies with a tunis gone out of it, which was its own kind of severing, the kind the woman in the stone had crossed 1,000 years to warn them against. Both roads ended in the same place. 2 people, ruined into one thing or torn into 2 things. Either way, no longer the whole that was also 2. Come down here being us, Hermione had said. Be 2 and 1 at the same time. Be the thing he can't imagine. Harry stopped trying to choose between bracing and dissolving. And in the stopping, in the refusal of both easy roads, he found the third thing, which had been there the whole time, which was the thing they already were on every ordinary day and had never once had to do on purpose. He let the seam move. Hermione had known from the moment the right lit that she was going to have to be the one who led. It was not a comfortable knowledge, and she did not enjoy it, bound to a cold stone with her wrists raw and her wand gone, and the worst man in the world's will laid along her soul like a hand along a wire. But it was true, and she had built her whole life on facing true things before they faced her. And this true thing was simply that Harry, brave and warm and devoted, was going to arrive at the bottom of the right with every instinct in his body screaming at him to fight, and fighting was the one thing that would get them killed. He would want to be a wall. He was made to be a wall. It was the best of him. It was the thing that had thrown itself between her and 100 curses over 7 years. And it would kill them both because the right was built to cut a wall. And so the person who understood that, the person who had worked it out on the cold sand while her right side went numb, was going to have to reach into her other half at the worst moment of both their lives and ask him to do the hardest thing she had ever asked anyone, to stop being a wall, to trust her enough to be water instead. She felt him arrive at the bottom of it. She felt the 2 easy roads open in front of him, the brace and the dissolve, and she felt him lean toward the brace. Because of course he did. Because a boy who has survived by hardening does not unlearn it in a night. and Hermione from the stone to the thing she was best at in all the world, which was not spellwork and was not dueling, and had never been the things the war valued. She taught, fast, wordless, across the note, with the right biting into them both. She taught him the hinge the way she had taught him 100 things in 100 libraries, not by telling him the answer, but by walking him to the edge of it and letting him see it for himself, because a thing you are shown you forget, and a thing you work out you keep. Not the wall, she showed him. Feel what the wall does. Feel how the blade loves the wall, and she let him feel it. Let him feel the right's terrible eagerness whenever either of them hardened, the way the pressure found purchase the instant they braced, so that he learned in half a second, in his own soul, the thing she could never have made him believe in words. That resistance was exactly what the blade was hungry for. Now the other way, she showed him. Feel the dissolve, and she let him feel that too, the awful sweetness of it, the seam going slack, the two of them pouring toward one, and she let him feel the blade lose the seam, and she let him feel, in the same instant, the horror underneath the relief, the them going out like a candle even as the pain stopped, so that he learned the second truth as fast as the first, that surrender saved them from the cut only by doing the cutting itself. And then because he was Harry, because he had always been the one who could take what she handed him and do something with it that she never could have, she felt him find the third thing on his own. She had walked him to the edge of it, and he had stepped off it into the place there were no words for, and she went with him. She had always gone with him, and the two of them, the wallmaker and the water finder, the engine and the brake, met in the middle of the fold and did together the thing neither could have done alone. They moved. She could not have moved without his ferocity to power it. He could not have moved without her understanding to aim it. And moving, they became the hinge, and the hinge was uncuttable, and it was the truest thing about them that had ever been true, that the survival of their whole soul required both halves of it and could not have been done by either. That they were, in the most literal and final sense, saved by being two, bound to the stone, with the blade sliding uselessly off the living surface of what they were. Hermione felt Lord Voldemort press harder, and she was not afraid anymore, because she had found the edge and she was standing on it, and she thought, with a fierce cold clarity that was entirely and unrepentantly herself, you built a machine to cut rigid things, and you brought it to the one soul in England that has spent all summer learning how not to be rigid, and you did it because you could not imagine us, and you could not imagine us because you spent your whole life making yourself into a man who could note Unconium pieces. You are about to lose to a girl and a boy who argue about the toast. And she found, even there, even then, that some unkillable part of her wanted to laugh. It is hard to say what this was because there are no plain words for it, and the plain words are the ones that lie about it. It was not bracing and it was not dissolving. It was closer to what a living thing does that a dead thing cannot, which is to be in motion while staying itself. A heart is not rigid and it is not liquid. It is a muscle that moves, and the movement is the life. And a heart held rigid is a heart that is stopped, and a heart gone slack is a heart that is stopped, and a heart gone slack is a heart that is burst. And the whole trick of being alive is the third thing, the moving, the endless refusal to be either. Harry and Hermione, at the bottom of the right, with the blade in the fold, did with their one soul what a heart does. They moved. They opened the seam and closed it and opened it. They were one, and then two, and then one. They refused, for even a single instant, to hold the fold still enough to be cut. And the right reached into the fold looking for an anchor, and found a hinge. Harry felt it happen from the inside, and it was the most extraordinary thing he would ever feel. More extraordinary than the first night in the kitchen, because the first night had been discovery, and this was mastery. This was the two of them using, under the worst pressure in the world, the thing they had spent all summer learning to be. The blade pressed, seeking the rigid line, and the line was not there, because the moment the blade found where the seam had been, the seam had already moved. They had already become one where the blade expected two, or two where it expected one, and a cutting edge that cannot find a fixed line to cut against is not cut. It slides. It slips off the living surface of a thing that will not hold the shape of the wound. Voldemort pressed harder and harder, with more will than he had ever spent on any working in his long deathless life, and it did not matter how hard he pressed, because he was pressing a blade against water, and the water only moved, and closed, and moved, and would not be held, and this was the thing that broke him, though it did not break him all at once. Lord Voldemort could not imagine what he was fighting. He had spent his life proving the soul comes apart, and he had proved it the only way he knew, by making rigid what he wished to cut. Every Horcrux he had ever made, he had made by first holding a piece of himself rigid, fixing it, anchoring it, and then tearing along the fixed line. His entire understanding of the soul was an understanding of rigid things and the lines you cut them on. He counted in pieces. He had made himself, deliberately, into a man who could only count in pieces. And a man who can only count in pieces cannot count a thing that will not hold still to be numbered. The living seam, the hinge, the two in one, was not a harder version of something he understood. It was a thing outside his understanding entirely, a color he had made himself blind to at 16, and he pressed his blade into it again and again with mounting fury, and it did the one thing his whole philosophy had no answer for, which was to remain whole while moving, to be uncuttable, not by being harder than the blade, but by being more alive than the blade could follow. Harry felt the fury turn to something else. He felt it across the note, because at this range, in this working, even Voldemort's mind was near enough to read, and what Harry read in it, under the fury, was the thing Harry had named up the hill and had not, until now, fully believed: fear, not fear of dying. Voldemort had abolished that fear a long time ago at terrible cost. This was older and worse, the fear he had been running from since he was 16, the fear that had made him tear himself apart in the first place, the fear of having been wrong, because if the blade could not cut this, then the soul did not, after all, simply come apart. There was a wholeness that would not be divided, that his sharpest edge and his strongest will slid off of like rain off a stone. And if that wholeness existed, then everything he had done to escape it, every murder, every tearing, the whole sevenfold ruin of himself, had been not courage but the most expensive mistake in the history of the world. And he had spent his one life paying for a lie. He could not have that. Harry felt him refuse it. Felt the great rigid architecture of the man refuse the knowledge even as the knowledge broke over him, and felt Voldemort do the thing that rigid things do when they meet a force they cannot move. He did not bend. He redoubled. He poured everything into one final catastrophic press. All of it, the whole cold enormous will of the man, determined to cut this whole soul in half through sheer force, if the finesse of the right would not do it, to prove by main strength the thing he could no longer prove by craft, and a blade pressed with everything against a thing that will not hold still and that does not break, has nowhere for the force to go but back. The backlash did not touch Harry and Hermione. That was the mercy of the hinge, the last gift of moving instead of bracing. The force that Voldemort poured into the seam found no purchase there, was not absorbed there, could not lodge there, because there was nothing rigid to lodge in. It slid off the living surface of the whole soul and went looking for somewhere to go, the way a struck force always does, and it went back up the blade into the hand that held it, back along the pressing wheel into the man it came from, and it found there, at last, something it could grip. It found a soul in pieces. Harry felt it happen and would never, for the rest of his life, be able to fully describe it, or fully want to. The force of the severing turned back, went into Lord Voldemort, and Lord Voldemort was the one thing in the cove that the right was perfectly built to cut, because he was exactly what the right had been designed for. A torn soul, held rigid, anchored in fragments. All the finding of rigid lines that had slid uselessly off Harry and Hermione found, in Voldemort, 100 rigid lines, every old tear, every fixed and jammed and violated fold where he had forced a piece of himself into a vessel. The blade he had built to cut a whole soul had found the one soul in the cove that was already cut, and it did there what it could not do to Harry and Hermione, which was to press into a fold and find it rigid and willing to be cut, and cut. The scream that came out of Lord Voldemort was not a sound a living thing should be able to make, and Harry understood that it was the sound of a man feeling, all at once, the true condition of the soul he had spent 50 years pretending was strength. Not one wound. Every tear he had ever made in himself, lit up at once by a severing force he had aimed at 2 children and had come back to him instead. It did not kill him. Harry knew even in the middle of it that it had not killed him, because a man distributed across 7 vessels does not die of one blow. That had always been the horror of him. But it did something Harry had never once managed to do in 6 years of fighting the man. It made him afraid to stay. Voldemort broke off the right. The green-white light guttered and went out, and in the ordinary dark it flooded back into the cove, with the sea suddenly loud again and the Death Eaters faltering, uncertain, unled. The tall, pale figure by the standing stone drew back from the 2 children, and there was in the movement none of the unhurried confidence of an hour before. He looked at Harry, and at Hermione bound to the stone, and Harry felt across the note the last thing he would ever feel from that mind for a long while, which was not hatred, and was not calculation, but was, purely and simply, the affront of the 16-year-old who had just been shown, past all his defenses, that there had been another road, and that he had not taken it, and that 2 children had, and that the universe was never going to let him unknow it again. He fled. There was no other word for it, though he would call it a withdrawal, though his people would call it a strategic retreat, though the histories the war eventually wrote would call it many careful things. Lord Voldemort, who had walked into the cove certain, walked out of it wounded in the one place he had spent his life armoring, and the Death Eaters went after him into the dark, and the cove was empty, and it was over, and Hermione was still bound to the stone, and Harry was over, and Hermione was still bound to the stone, and Harry was already running to her before the last of them and gone. He got the bindings off with hands that did not work properly because his whole body was shaking, and Hermione came off the stone into his arms, and neither of them said anything for a long moment, because there was nothing that words could do that the note was not already doing. The note flooding warm and whole and blessedly. Ordinarily too, the scene reforming, tender and new, and theirs, the far ends of both of them coming home out of the dark, as the distance closed to nothing at all. "Bill?" Hermione said finally, into his shoulder. Harry. Bill went down. I felt it. They found Bill in the shadow at the edge of the cove, and he was alive, and he was hurt, a curse across the shoulder that had knocked him cold and would need Mrs. Weasley's hands and a long convalescence. But he was alive, and he woke as they reached him and looked up at the two of them kneeling over him and said thickly, Did it work? The flaw in the right? I never got to see if it worked, Harry said. You gave us the second we needed. It worked, Bill. Good, said Bill, and passed out again, satisfied in the way of a man who has done the one useful thing and can rest. They got him up between them, and they got themselves up the headland in the gray coming light, and somewhere on the climb Ron found them, and the rest of the order behind him, come the long way, by broom and by the fixed points of safe houses, arriving too late for the fight and exactly in time for the carrying home, which is a thing wars need as much as they need fighters. And Ron looked at the two of them. Whole, alive, Hermione's wrists raw from the binding, and Harry's left side aching back to life, and he did not say anything clever for once. He just got under Bill's other arm and helped carry his brother up the hill, and every so often on the climb, he looked over at Harry and Hermione. Checking, the way you check a thing you were afraid you lost and finding it there each time and each time, letting out a small breath. The safe house that night was full of the particular exhaustion that comes after a thing has been survived that should not have been survivable, and everyone dealt with it in their own way. Mrs. Kyditz. Weasley dealt with it by feeding people whether or not they were hungry, and by hovering over Bill until Fleur arrived and took over the hovering with a fierce accented competence that Mrs. Moore, Weasley for once, allowed. Kingsley dealt with it by wanting a report, standing in the kitchen with his arms folded, and it fell to Hermione to give it, because Harry was still shaking too hard to talk in complete sentences, and she gave it precisely, the capture, the sundering, the right, the flaw Bill had found, the hinge, all of it flat and sourced and true. Except for the parts that were not facts, which she kept because she had already decided which things went in the book and which things did not. Kingsley listened to all of it without moving, and at the end he was quiet for a while, and then he said the thing that Hermione had been braced for since the garden, the thing she had feared more than the right. You understand what this means. If he knows what you are, then every operation the two of you are part of has to account for it. You can't be split, we knew that. But now you can't be caught together either, because caught together is what he wants. You become the most dangerous thing an asset can be, which is a thing the enemy has a specific plan for. He looked at them, not unkindly, a tired man doing an impossible sum. I have to think about how to use you, both of you. And I want you to know, I hate that I have to think of it that way. Because you're children, and because you just walked out of a soul-severing on a Cornish beach, and instead of letting you rest, I'm standing in a kitchen working out your operational profile. That's the war. It makes accountants of us all. We're not assets, Harry said. It was the first full sentence he'd managed in an hour. We're people. We'll fight. We've always fought, but we decide together where we stand, and we don't stand apart, and if that makes us harder to use, then you use us harder, but you don't split us to make the arithmetic easier. We nearly died tonight because someone did the arithmetic instead of asking the people. Kingsley looked at him for a long moment. No, he said at last. That's fair, Harry. And he unfolded his arms and something in the kitchen eased, and he said more gently, Get some sleep, both of you. That's an order I actually want obeyed. They did not sleep, of course. They lay in the attic in the two beds with the narrow gap between them, the way they had the night the lynx came, and they were both too wrung out to sleep and too alive to want to. And for a long time, they simply lay there in the dark and felt the note between them run warm and whole and ordinary, and it was the sweetest thing either of them had ever felt. The ordinariness of it, the sheer unremarkable warmth of a soul at rest in two bodies that had very nearly been cut in half and were not. I keep thinking about his face, Harry said eventually, into the dark. At the end, when he understood. I've wanted him afraid for 6 years. I thought it would feel like winning. And it didn't. It felt like watching someone find out they'd wasted their whole life, all of it. Every terrible thing he ever did, and he did it to run from a thing we did by accident in a kitchen at 3 a.m. Harry was quiet. I don't feel sorry for him. Don't think I feel sorry for him. But I keep thinking, that could have been anyone. That could have been me. If I'd been that afraid of dying, that afraid of losing people, and nobody had ever, if you hadn't. He stopped. He never had a you. That's the whole difference between us. He never once in his life had a person he'd rather stay two with. And I did. I do. And that's the only reason I'm the one lying here, and he's the one running into the dark with his soul on fire. Hermione reached across the gap between the beds. He met her halfway, the way he always did, and she held his hand in the dark and did not say anything for a while, because there were things his own soul was already saying to hers that no words of hers could improve. And then she said the only thing that needed saying, which was the true thing. Which was the thing she would go on saying for the rest of their lives in one form or another, every ordinary morning, you have a me. You'll always have a me. That's not gravity, Harry. That's a choice I make, and I'm making it, and I'll make it again tomorrow. And she felt him understand it, felt it land in the place where he had spent his whole childhood, braced to lose everyone he loved, and felt that oldest bruise of him ease, not vanish. It would never entirely vanish, but ease, under the warmth of a hand that had chosen to be there and would go on choosing. It was a week before Hermione would talk about the choice, and when she did, it was in the attic room at the safe house, with the gray stone on the floor between them and the black notebook open on her knee, and she was not writing in it. That was how Harry knew it mattered. She had the notebook open and the pen in her hand, and she was not writing, because some things she had decided did not go in the book, and this was going to be one of them, and she wanted him to know it was going to be one of them before she said it. "I've been trying to write down what we did," she said. "In the cove. The hinge. How it worked, so that it's in ink, the way I said. So the ink remembers even if we forget." She closed the pen in her fist. "And I can't. I've tried all week. Every time I write it down, it's a lie. Because the true thing about what we did isn't a technique, Harry. It isn't a method you could teach someone. If I write down 'let the scene move,' then someone reads it and thinks it's a spell, a trick, a thing you do with your will, and it isn't. It's a thing you are. We didn't survive because we knew a clever fact about rights. We survived because we've spent all summer, without meaning to, learning how to be two people who are one soul and not drown in it and not tear on it. The hinge isn't magic. The hinge is a marriage. It's the daily thing. It's every morning we chose to still disagree about the toast." Harry looked at her. "So it doesn't go in the book." "So it doesn't go in the book," she agreed. "Because the book is for facts, and this isn't a fact. It's a practice. And the only way to keep it is to keep doing it. Every day, forever. Which is terrifying, because it means we're never done. There's no working we can perform once and be safe." The woman in the stone was right about that too. Anyone can be one. Anyone can bore themselves into another person and disappear, and it feels like love, and it's the easiest thing in the world, and it would have killed us. And anyone can be two. Can stand apart and armor up and be a self against the world, and that feels like strength, and it's the second easiest thing, and it would have killed us too. The hard thing, the thing there's no shortcut to, the thing we have to choose again every single day for the rest of our lives, is to be both. To stay two on purpose. To keep the seam alive by using it, by bumping into each other, by being genuinely, annoyingly, separately ourselves, forever, so that the fold never goes rigid enough to cut and never goes slack enough to lose. She looked down at the closed notebook. It's not a happy ending. It's better than a happy ending. It's a happy practice. But it's work, and it never stops being work. And I wanted you to know that before we decide to do it, Harry said. "Before we decide to do it," she said. "Because we do have to decide, Harry. That's the thing I keep coming back to. What we are isn't a fate. It's not a thing that was done to us that we just have to live inside. The woman in the stone lost her other half and lived 11 winters and stayed whole, which means the oneness isn't a cage. It isn't a thing that possesses us. We could, in theory, if we wanted, if one of us wanted, we could learn to live further apart, learn to be more separate, let the bond thin down to something we could carry into two different lives. People would tell us to. Sensible people. People who love us. They'd say, don't build your whole existence on one other person. It's not healthy. What if? What if? What if? And they wouldn't be wrong to worry. So it has to be a choice. Every day. Not a thing we fell into and can't get out of. A thing we choose, with our eyes open, knowing the cost, knowing we could choose otherwise. Because a bond you can't leave isn't love. It's just gravity. And I don't want to be your gravity, Harry. I want to be your choice. The gray light moved in the attic. Down below, the house was waking, the ordinary sounds of it, a kettle, a door, Mrs. Weasley's voice carrying up through 2 floors with a purpose that did not need words to arrive. Harry was quiet for a long time. And then he did a thing that surprised them both, which was that he reached over and picked up the pen out of her fist and opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote, in his own untidy hand, under all her careful upright columns of distances and warnings and copied out accounts, 2 words, and he turned the book around so she could read them. I choose. And under that, after a moment, he added the date. Hermione looked at it for a long time. Then she took the pen back, and under his 2 words, she wrote her own, in her small, precise hand. So do I. And her own date, the same date, the way the 2 lamps in the oldest story had died within the same hour of the same night, being one thing to the last. Except that this was not a death. This was the opposite of a death. This was 2 people choosing, on an ordinary gray morning in the middle of a war, to go on being the hard, beautiful, 2-fold whole thing they were, on purpose, with their eyes open. For as long as they both should live, we'll have to do it again tomorrow, she said. The choosing. It doesn't carry over. That's the whole point. I know. Every day. Even the days we're angry at each other. Especially those days. I know, Harry said. I'm counting on the angry days. The angry days are how we know the seam's still there. He almost smiled and felt her feel him almost smile. And felt her almost smile back, the 2 of them passing the one warmth back and forth across the fold that was theirs and would stay theirs precisely because they would never let it close. You're going to be wrong about things, Hermione. Out loud. Forever. And I'm going to let you, because every time you're wrong and I know it and I love you anyway, that's another day the blade slides off. Our whole marriage is going to be an anti-severing rite, and it's just going to look like two people bickering about the toast." "It is not a marriage," Hermione said. "We're 17. It's an arrangement of the soul." "It's a marriage," Harry said. "It's the oldest one there is. We just did the ceremony 1,000 years before the vows." And he watched her decide to argue with him about it, watched the whole familiar machinery of Hermione building a case start up behind her eyes, and he felt the seam draw tight and tender and alive between them at the exact moment of her disagreement, and he thought that there had never in the history of the world been a sweeter proof that the two of them were going to be all right than the sight of the other half of opening him her mouth. The practice, once they had chosen it, turned out to look like nothing at all. That was the thing no one warned them about, and the thing Hermione came, over the following weeks, to treasure most, that the great work of keeping a whole soul whole was almost entirely invisible, and consisted of the smallest possible things done on purpose. It looked like Harry insisting on making the tea a way she thought was wrong, and her letting him and telling him it was wrong and drinking it anyway. It looked like her spending an afternoon on a book he found dull, alone in the corner while he cleaned his broom, the two of them in the same room doing separate things, the seam held gently open by the simple fact of two different objects. It looked, more than anything, like disagreement chosen and cherished, the deliberate maintenance of the two of them as two of. They almost lost it once, that autumn, and it frightened them both more than the Cove had. It happened, absurdly, over nothing. The way the dangerous things always did. They had been shut up together for 3 days in a cramped bolt hole with nothing to do and nowhere to go, and the closeness had thickened, and one gray afternoon Hermione had looked up from her book and realized, with a lurch of the old fear, that she could not remember the last time she and Harry had disagreed about anything. 3 days of perfect accord. 3 days of finishing each other's thoughts and wanting the same things, and never once bumping into each other's edges. And it had felt wonderful. It had felt like rest, and that was exactly what made her put the book down with her hands not quite steady. "Harry." She kept her voice level. "When did we last have an argument?" He looked up, and she watched him reach for it, and watched him not find it, and watched the same fear cross his face that was crossing hers, because he understood at once. The seam had been going slack. 3 days of ease, and neither of them had noticed, because slackness does not announce itself. Slackness feels like harmony. Slackness feels like finally getting to rest. They had been drifting, gently, without alarm, toward the drowning the woman in the stone had crossed 1,000 years to warn them against, and it had not felt like danger for one single second. It had felt like love. That was the horror of it. The thing Hermione had said in the lane and now had to live. Being pushed together doesn't feel like danger, it feels like coming home. "Say something you actually think that I'll hate," Harry said. And so they had done the strangest, most tender thing either of them had ever done. They had manufactured a fight. Deliberately, awkwardly, with the self-consciousness of two people performing an exercise, they had found things to disagree about, small, real, true differences that the ease had papered over, and they had made them stilted and unconvincing at first. Two people arguing about whether the bolt hole was too cold or she was simply always cold, whether he took stupid risks or she was simply always frightened, and it had felt ridiculous. And then somewhere in the middle of it, a real disagreement had surfaced, an actual one about something that mattered, about whether they had been right to keep the secret from Ron as long as they had, and Hermione had found herself genuinely angry, and Harry had found herself genuinely angry, and Harry had found himself genuinely angry and tender and alive between them. And they had both felt it catch, felt the fold come back, felt themselves become two again. And they had stopped arguing and looked at each other across the cold little room with enormous relief and something close to laughter. "That's the maintenance," Hermione had said shakily. "That's it. That's the whole thing. We have to do that. Not fake it. That didn't work, the fake fight. It only worked when it turned real. We have to actually stay two people who actually sometimes think the other one is actually wrong. Forever. We have to guard the disagreement like it's the most precious thing we own, because it is, because it's the thing the ease keeps trying to take from us. And the ease feels so good, Harry. That's what makes it so dangerous. The ease feels exactly like the thing we want most. So we keep the fights," Harry had said. "We keep the fights. We treasure the fights. We're going to be the only couple in the history of the world who's grateful for every single row, because every row is another day the blade can't find us." She had almost smiled. It's the least romantic love story ever told. Two people who stay in love by making absolutely certain they never entirely agree about anything. "It's the most romantic one," Harry had said. "It's two people who love each other so much they refuse to let love turn them into one boring thing anyone can dissolve into somebody. It takes a whole soul to keep showing up as yourself." And he had gone to make the tea the wrong way, and she had let him, and told him it was wrong, and drunk it, and that had been the practice, and it had looked like nothing at all, and it had been the most important thing either of them ever learned to do. The hardest test of the practice was not the Cove, and it was not the slack days in the bolt hole. It was grief. It came in the deep of that winter, with the loss the war handed them the way the war handed everyone losses, without warning and without justice. And it does not matter now to set down the name, only that it was someone they had both loved, and that the loving of that person had been one of the things Harry and Hermione had genuinely shared, undivided, without a seam. And when the news came, the grief came into the two of them as one grief. Because they had loved as one, and for a night and a day it was the most natural thing in the world to let the seam go slack and drown in it together. To pour into each other and be one great single sorrow instead of two smaller ones, because two smaller ones meant being alone with it in the small hours, and one big one meant never being alone at all. Hermione felt them starting to dissolve, and for the first time, she did not want to stop it. That was the thing she had not understood until she was inside it, that the temptation to become one was strongest not in ease and not in danger, but in pain, because pain is the thing a person most wants not to bear alone, and being one soul offered the unbearable sweetness of never bearing anything alone again. She lay in the dark with Harry's grief and her grief flowing together into a single tide, and she thought, why not let this one thing be shared all the way down? Why keep a seam through this? Who is the seam even for? And she felt them going. Felt the two of them softening toward the one, and it did not feel like drowning. It felt like the only mercy available in a merciless week. It was Harry who found the seam that time. He, who could never remember a fact she'd told him twice, remembered this one, because it had been carved into him on a chapel floor and again on a Cornish beach. Guard the seam, especially when it is most tempting to let it go. Most of all in love, most of all in grief. And he did the hardest thing, which was to disagree with her about the person they were grieving. Gently, truthfully. He remembered them one way and she remembered them another, and he said so. Said no, that's not how they were, that's how you needed them to be. They were harder than that. They were more difficult and more real than the soft thing grief was trying to make of them. And Hermione had flared with a real and sudden anger. How dare you, at a time like this? And the anger was the seam. The anger drew the fold tight and tender and separate, and they came apart and tatsoi alter ot, and it was worse. That was the thing no one told you. Being two was worse. It hurt more. Each of them had to carry the whole weight of the loss in a single pair of arms instead of splitting it between them. But it was true, and it was theirs, and in the morning they were still two people, still themselves, still able to grieve differently. Hermione in silence and lists and ferocious activity, Harry in long walks and longer quiet, and because they grieved differently, they could witness each other's grief, instead of only feeling their own doubled. She could hold him while he wept in the way she never wept. He could sit with her while she worked in the way he never worked. If they had dissolved, they would have had only the one grief, felt twice, with no one outside it to reach a hand in. Staying two meant that even in the worst of it, each of them still had someone to come home to who was not simply themselves wearing another face. I hated you for it, Hermione told him. Weeks later, when the sharpest edge had worn off the loss, when you disagreed with me about them, that night. I've never hated you like that, not even for a second, and it lasted about 4 seconds, and then I understood what you'd done, and I loved you more than I've ever loved anything, and both of those were real, and both of those were in 4 seconds, and that's the whole thing, isn't it? That's what we are. Someone I can hate for 4 seconds and love forever in the same breath, because the hating and the loving both need me to still be a separate person from you, and you kept me one. You kept me one when I wanted to disappear. Thank you. She had never, in all the notebook's careful pages, written down a single word of that night. Some things are kept by living them, not by ink. And that night she kept the way you keep a scar, which is a wound that chose to become a part of you instead of the end of you. The war did not end that morning. Wars do not end because 2 children survive a night on a headland, and there were dark months still ahead, and losses, and the long grinding work of finding the last of the pieces of a soul that would not stop trying to be deathless. Harry and Hermione walked into all of it, together, at each other's left hand, and the fact that they were one whole soul in 2 bodies turned out to matter less in the daily fighting of the war than anyone might have expected. Because in the end, a war is won by ordinary courage repeated past the point of exhaustion. And courage was a thing they had always had, separately and together, before they ever knew they shared a soul at all. But the man who counted in pieces never came for them again the way he had come to the cove. He had learned, at terrible cost, to the one thing he could not afford to have wounded, that there was a wholeness in the world his blade could not divide. And though he never once admitted it, never once let the knowledge reach his face, it changed the way he moved against them from that night on. The way a man moves differently near a fire that has already burned him. He avoided the 2 of them together. He looked for ways to catch them apart, and found, to his mounting frustration, that they had stopped, since the cove, being ever quite apart at all. And somewhere under the avoidance, in the small cold hours that troubled even his distributed sleep, the 16-year-old he had tried so hard to murder in himself went on knowing the thing the cove had taught him. And it was the beginning, though it would take the whole rest of the war to finish, of the unmaking of Lord Voldemort. Not a sword, not a spell, not a prophecy, but the simple, unbearable fact of 2 people who had done, out of love, the thing he had torn himself to ruins to fail at, and had lived, and had chosen it, and would go on thiening. Everywhere in Dorn and in court, or nether will been auf. They told Ron everything, in the end. Not because the war required it, but because they had promised, on a staircase, a lifetime ago, as it felt, that they would not let the thing they were make them smaller. would not become the kind of people who kept everyone they loved on the far side of glass. So they told him all of it, the cove and the hinge and the choice and the practice, one long evening by a fire, and Ron listened, and at the end he was quiet for a while. And then he said, "So, the two of you nearly died because you're one thing, and you survived because you decided to stay two things, and the whole rest of your lives is going to be you deliberately having Rose so a dark wizard can't find the seam." He shook his head slowly. "That's the maddest love story I've ever heard, and I grew up with Fleur and Bill, so that's saying something." And then, more quietly, the thing that mattered, the thing that told them he had made it all the way through the grief to the other side. "I'm glad it's you two. I mean it. If there had to be one soul walking around and two people in the middle of a war, I'm glad it was the two of you. Because I can't think of anyone else stubborn enough to keep choosing the hard version. Most people would have taken the easy one. You lot were always too pig-headed to take the easy anything." Which was, from Ron Weasley, very nearly a benediction, and Harry and Hermione both understood it as one. And the seam between them held warm and whole and did not so much as flicker, because being glad about Ron was one of the things they got to feel undivided. One of the places the two of them were simply, wholly, at peace. And so they went on. Through the winter and the loss and the long grinding spring, at each other's left hand, two people who were one soul and had learned the difficult grace of remaining two, and the war took a great deal from them, as wars do, but it never once took the thing the man who counted in pieces had come to the cove to take, because that thing was not a possession they could be robbed of. It was a practice they renewed each morning, and a practice cannot be stolen, only abandoned, and they never abandoned it. Not on the angry days, not on the grieving days, not on the days so full of ease it would have been the sweetest thing in the world to let the seam go slack and drown. They stayed too. On purpose. For love. It was the hardest magic either of them ever performed, and it never once looked like magic, and that was how they knew it was the realest kind. On the night the war finally ended, a long time later, in the wreck of a place that had once been a school, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger stood together at a window while the sun came up over the grounds, close enough that the note between them ran warm and whole and entirely at rest. And neither of them said anything, because there was nothing words could do that the note was not already doing, and somewhere far down in the two of them, older than the war, older than the school, older than either of their names, the single low sustained note that was the soul they shared went on sounding. One string drawn taut between two lamps, unbroken and unbreakable. Not because it could not be cut, but because the two who carried it had learned the one thing the man who counted in pieces never could. That the way to keep a whole thing whole is not to guard it against ever being touched, but to keep it moving, and to keep it too. And to choose it in the plain light of every morning, and again and again sad.